Okay, Commissioner.
The streaming is now live.
Commissioner, the live stream is now active and it's time to start the meeting.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Strategic Policing and Crime Board on Tuesday, 21st of December 2021 at 10 AM. My name is Simon Foster and I'm the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner, and I'm joined this morning by members of the board, the Chief Constable, Deputy Chief Constable, other police officers and staff, representatives of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, the Violence Reduction Unit at St Giles Trust, and most importantly of all, our youth commissioners. There are times attached to the agenda items, and I'll be having regard to these in the interests of an effective and efficient meeting and to ensure that we complete the meeting within the allocated time. If during the course of the meeting people want to contribute at appropriate times, then please raise your digital hand and I'll bring you into the meeting as soon as I'm able to do so. So agenda item 1 is apologies and Police and Crime Commissioner update. We have apologies from board member Charmaine Burton. Do we have any other apologies?
No.
Don't believe we do. Thank you very much.
I've not been notified, Henry, no.
Thank you very much. I have 3 matters in relation to my Police and Crime Commissioner update. Firstly, I'd like to begin by highlighting the government funding settlement we received on Thursday, 16th of December, and the start of my budget consultation that'll run until the 30th of January 2022. There were 2 basic tests of this government funding announcement. Firstly, has the government put the funding in place to return our 1,000 missing officers? And secondly, has it plugged the black hole in our finances caused by rising costs and inflation? This government has failed both tests, and in doing so has failed West Midlands Police and has failed the people of the West Midlands. Since 2010, the West Midlands Police has lost 2,221 police officers. That was 25% of our police officers as a consequence of central government defunding of our police service. We're only due to receive 1,200 officers back over the coming years. We've simply been asking the government to comply with its own pledge to level up and return our 1,000 missing officers to the West Midlands. The government is yet again providing us with a stark choice: raise the local council tax policing precept again by £10 for abandoned property, or face yet further cuts to policing. The effect of central government decision making in recent years has been that the people of the West Midlands have had to pay more local council tax for less local policing. And it's clear there's to be no levelling up for West Midlands Police or the people of the West Midlands. It should also be noted, in addition to that, the government has instructed police and crime commissioners to make a further £80 million of cost savings across the country during the course of the next financial year. And I trust local elected politicians will not forget this instruction over the coming months. I'd much rather that the government had fully funded this increase rather than effectively mandating it and transferring the burden onto local council taxpayers. With rising costs and inflation, the West Midlands Police budget remains under pressure. On the 17th of December, I launched my annual public consultation on the budget for West Midlands Police, and I'd encourage everybody in the West Midlands, if you work, live or study in the region, to respond to this consultation. Secondly, the brutal murder of Arthur Labinjo Hughes was an horrendous and shocking act. It's right that the appalling acts of Father Thomas Hughes and stepmother Emma Tustin have been held to account via our criminal justice system, and that their actions have been condemned by wider society in the strongest possible terms. The circumstances in which Arthur was murdered were truly heartrending. It would be inappropriate for me to comment on the specifics of this case while the national review is underway. I have, of course, sought assurance that West Midlands Police will be cooperating with the inquiry, and I know that they welcome the review and took the responsibility they had to bring Hughes and Tustin to justice with the utmost seriousness. and I'll be giving very serious attention to the national review into this case and the local implications for any action that is needed in the West Midlands. What I can say, however, is that it is totally unacceptable that children and young people have all too often throughout the past and to this day been subjected to and continue to be subjected to abuse, neglect and violence. It's the first duty of government to keep its people safe and secure, and key public bodies must discharge their functions having regard to the need to safeguard and promote the welfare of children. However, it's not enough to will the outcome. Parliament, and in particular government, must also will the means and demonstrate that it's prepared to do whatever it takes to prevent cases like this happening in the future. And finally, I'd like to wish everyone across the West Midlands a happy, peaceful and safe Christmas and New Year. And I also pay tribute to the police officers and staff who will be working hard over the festive period to keep us all safe. However, I'd also like to highlight that there are people for whom home will not be a safe place over Christmas. We know that domestic abuse can be a significant issue at this time of the year, and I'm pleased that in recent months we've doubled the number of independent advisors working to support victims throughout the criminal justice system and have supported recent campaigns to encourage reporting. Across the West Midlands, there is support for those suffering domestic abuse, and I'd encourage anyone suffering abuse or violence to visit a website hosted by the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, noexcuseforabuse.info, where information on all the support available is hosted. That support is available whether you report abuse to the police or not. Agenda item 2 is notes of the last meeting, which was on the 23rd of November 2021. Are there any matters people have arising from the notes of the last meeting? Don't see anybody indicating, so I will take it that those notes of the last meeting are then agreed. Agenda item 3, which is questions from members of the public. We don't have any questions from members of the public this morning, which takes us to agenda item 4, which is questions from board members. And we have 3 questions from members of the board this morning. We'll take the questions one at a time. And this morning, all 3 questions are to be asked by board member Councillor Bhupinder Garkal. Bhupinder, would you like to ask your first question, please?
Thank you, Commissioner. Chief, burglaries in the West Midlands are steadily increasing, particularly in the Asian community, as they're being targeted for gold. Can the Chief Constable please supply an update on what is being done to tackle this? And what the reassurance the Chief Constable can offer that everything is being done to make people feel safe in their own homes? Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for the question this morning. Burglary on people's homes is always a very important issue for policing priorities. It's not just a property crime at all. We know that it's very much an invasion into people's privacy, and victims who are subject to burglary suffer long-term trauma, I think, in terms of the impact of the invasion on their privacy. Just in terms of what's happening with burglary in the West Midlands, I think it's just important to just talk about and set into context. So, as people can imagine, last year was an extraordinary year in terms of burglary because of the extended period that people were required to work and stay at home. So, as one can imagine, there was a dramatic reduction in burglary last year. This year, there is a 7% increase against last year, which is 700 more burglaries. But because last year was such an odd year, we are baselining our performance and work around burglary on the year before, which was what we say was a much more normal year. So against the year 2019, actually burglary is already nearly 19% down on that period. So our burglary is in a long-term trend of reducing, excepting it's gone up a little bit this year, set against a COVID year, but against the position we were back in our last normal year, it's quite substantially down. And we should expect to see the pressure on burglary continuing through the work that the force is doing. Specifically, your concern does relate specifically to the concerns around members of the Asian community suffering burglary being targeted, and particularly this phenomenon of potentially targeted communities for gold. So we are aware of that work. It is an area that the force regularly concentrates, particularly at seasonal times of the year where that may be more of an issue around, for example, marriages. We have a series of investigations that are taking place at the moment that we're very focused on that have impacted more dramatically on Asian communities. And they were offences that took place in October and November of this year. And there were some common themes around a number of suspects involved in burglaries, particularly forced entries, and particularly some thefts of valuable items such as jewellery. It did disproportionately affect victims from Asian communities, that series. And whilst there's no specific information, any specific faith is being targeted, we are investigating as a series of offences in the region. We have already made 3 arrests to date around that series, and the individuals are currently released on police bail. So there is some specific work taking place on that particular area. What we would say is this is always an area that we're looking very hard. A lot of our offender management work is very much based on targeting prolific offenders for burglary. We do a lot of work with our forensic deployment to make sure we gather a rich yield of forensic evidence, and our investigation teams work closely with the local policing units to make sure we target key hotspots for burglary as well. And of course, through the C3 project, we've also developed an intense multi-agency rehabilitation scheme to try and drive down prolific offenders. So in summary, we're very aware that there have been some crimes that have disproportionately affected the Asian communities, and we're investigating those. But our longer-term trend in the region is that burglary is reducing.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. Bhupinder, would you like to ask your second question now, please?
Thank you, Commissioner. Chief, with Christmas fast approaching, can the Chief Constable please explain what policing strategy is in place in regards to large crowds, gathering, excessive drinking during this pandemic? Thank you.
Yes, so thank you for the question. First and foremost, just to say about the pandemic rules. So whilst there have been some new government regulations brought through around mask wearing, the current posture of the force is very much, again, the 4 E's that we used. And because these restrictions are more recently, the emphasis of the force is much more on education, engagement, and trying to ensure people are encouraged to comply rather than the direct approach to enforcement. The regs only relatively recently changed, and we're working with the public to understand those arrangements. There are also going to be some changes in terms of COVID passports as they've been coined for access into premises, but those regulations have not been implemented yet in a position where the force is engaged in working on those. So our whole approach in general is exactly as it is all the times of the year, is to encourage responsible behaviours in the licensing industry and to use our powers to comply with them, and to specifically target key crimes that we would be worried about in our hospitality industry. That focus is very much, first of all, on reducing violence with a focus on under 25s and to alcohol and drugs. Our nighttime economy is one of the areas we see hotspots for violence. It is to create a safe environment for women and girls, and particularly to improve the perception of public safety. So a lot of the work we're doing is trying to create a safe environment for women to go and enjoy the nighttime economy. We work to reduce hate crime and public perception of hate crime. This has been particularly marked with the LGBTQ plus community in Birmingham City Centre, with some hate crimes committed against them. And of course, what we also try and do is ensure we do this in a way that minimises risk to officers. I'd also say our approach is also to support the economic recovery of the hospitality sector, because we are very keen to see a thriving and successful nighttime economy in our city centres, and our whole approach is to work with industry and to use enforcement of breaches only when it's necessary. So how do we do that? Well, it's a year-long business, but there are some different things we do at Christmas. So we work very closely with our city centre teams, our business improvement districts, our local authorities and licensing teams to look very closely around the arrangements for licensing. This is particularly the case more so these days with the outdoor presence of serving areas. We develop detailed operational plans in terms of deployment, and we've been regularly reviewing the number of officers deployed to the nighttime economy and very much debriefing each event to debrief opportunities. If there are licensing premises that are not operating in the legislation, we work very closely to enforce against them, and people will see there are examples around that we do. We very much try and encourage licensed premises to adopt best practice schemes to minimise violence in their environment. Final issue, of course, we have some specific differences at Christmas, as you rightly identified. We have the Christmas market that runs particularly here in Birmingham city centre. We do put a specific operation in place for that because there is not only an increase in footfall for shopping, but there is also a number of standing drinking establishments that take place during that period. So we put more officers in place to target that work as well. The key challenge, I think, as we can all imagine over the last couple of weeks, is that footfall is down in the licensed premises sector. We also know it may be subject to enhanced restrictions as we go forward because of the latest outbreaks around COVID. But our intention is to work closely with that sector to make sure that it emerges from the pandemic healthy and thriving and safe.
Thanks very much, Chief Constable. Bhupinder, would you like to ask your third question, please?
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, what, if any, campaign has West Midlands Police in place to tackle drink driving during the festive season? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So again, another topical issue. So as always at this time of year, there is a National Police Chiefs Council National Drug Driving operation that runs between the 1st of December and the 1st of January. We're in the process of doing that. The national operations attention is to draw drivers' attention to the risk posed by drink driving and also the serious penalties. We do these days concentrate on control and illegal drugs as much as alcohol because they are very much more serious issues than they used to be, as well as drink driving. The Force Traffic Department leads this work, and the aim of the objective is, of course, to engage, it's to target dangerous and irresponsible drivers, protect other road users from harm, and raise public awareness of police enforcement activity. So far, since the campaign started, the Traffic Department have conducted 225 breath tests. 23 of those are positive, and or people have refused, and we've also administered 20 drug wipe, of which 12 are positive so far. Across the whole of the force outside the campaign, between the 1st of December and the 14th of December, we've made 85 arrests for drug and drink driving. So it's a constant process the work does. It's led by the traffic unit, but very much at the forefront of enforcement activity this time of year, both here in the West Midlands, but nationally across policing.
Thank you, Chief Constable, and thank you very much, Councillor Bhupinder Garkle, for those three questions. That then takes us to agenda item 5, which is community policing. And this agenda item is to be presented by Assistant Chief Constable Richard Baker. We're asking that presentations are please kept to 3 minutes, on the assumption that board members have all had the opportunity to read the paper. It's available to members of the public to read, and so as to maximise the opportunity for questions and discussion of the issues arising from the report. So Assistant Chief Constable Richard Baker, please proceed to present your report, please.
Okay, Commissioner Richard will present. You've probably lost us on camera. We're just going to try and get our camera back, but hopefully you can hear us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. So we all recognise it's absolutely essential to have a well-resourced, well-trained and supported neighbourhood policing structure in order to build trust, confidence within our communities. And West Midlands Police, we've always been very proud and incredibly proactive about ensuring our neighbourhood policing unit has established neighbourhood officers and PCSOs within their communities. Currently, West Midlands Police is the 6th highest spending force in England and Wales on neighbourhood policing, that's per head of population. And between the 1st of March 2021 and the 31st of March 2022, neighbourhood policing in the West Midlands will see an increase in resources from 1,165 police constables to 1,403 police constables. So that's an increase in total of 238 constables. There's also an additional 12 sergeants that are being uplifted in that time as well, so a total of 250 additional officers over a 12-month period. Within our neighbourhood policing teams, we've also got an establishment of PCSOs. The establishment currently is at 477. We are currently seeing higher resignations than usual due to the police uplift programme and a number of PCSOs leaving West Midlands Police to join the regular police force. However, we do have a large intake planned for April 2022, where we'll be looking to recruit an additional 48 PCSOs, train them up, and hopefully get back up to full establishment again. In relation to our special constables, who again are essential in terms of supporting our neighbourhood policing structure and some of our specialist departments, we've seen an increase from 240 special constables to 311 over the course of about the last 18 months. These broadly fall into two main types. So we have a number of specials from local universities that we do a lot of work with, as you'll be aware, and we also look to our long-term career special constables as well. By the end of March 2022, it's anticipated that we're likely to hit 100,000 hours, patrol hours from our special constables, which is, I think, a phenomenal input from those 300 particular officers. We've been working very closely with Dr. Ian Britton, who's a well-known police academic, looking to improve recruitment and retention of our special constables, and that work will continue. The training and development of our neighbourhood police officers continues. Again, another incredibly important piece of our work. We're looking at a programme of professionalising our neighbourhood policing, ensuring that all our officers have got training in problem-solving masterclasses, which are based on the SARA principles, along with a number of other particular training courses as well. We aim to train at least 400 police officers and staff by the end of 2022 in the principles of SARA. We'll continue to build additional capacity of neighbourhood police officers in our local schools and pupil referral units. As part of the uplift numbers I've spoken of earlier, we're investing a number of those into schools. So we've got 25 dedicated schools-based officers, and we'll have an additional 37 early help officers to support families and young people. The police cadet scheme, again, I think is another fantastic piece of evidence of the work we'll be doing in schools and local communities. Currently got 22 cadet schemes in total, with a capacity of 660 cadets. And we're aiming to increase this by the end of March 2022 to 780 active cadets, so an additional 4 more schemes to come online. We do, as you will be aware, a huge amount of work with our mental health partners. Mental health contributes an enormous amount to our demand and calls for service. You'll be aware from reading the paper that we're moving away from the street triage team shortly, but we are implementing a mental health tactical advisor initiative. So this will place much wider provision of support for the public and colleagues and partners, and we'll have far many more police officers trained to the same level as our street triage team officers across all departments, and that especially includes local policing as well. We utilise the data analytics lab, and we've also improved our business insights to kind of enrich our understanding of our performance, specifically in relation to demand, neighbourhood crime information and crime severity, provisionally around the impact areas, but we can do this across our whole geography as well. And a number of new applications have been designed to help improve the effectiveness of neighbourhood policing. And a new targeted patrol app is complete and hopefully due to be launched shortly, which will also help us better understand where neighbourhood officers have been patrolling during their shift. A focus of our neighbourhood policing activity remains in impact areas. There's currently 19 impact areas, and the investment in resourcing and partnership activity and community engagement have seen some really significant results in these areas. To date, we've seen 15 impact areas are either good or outstanding for reducing burglary. 18 areas are good or outstanding for reducing robbery. 14 good or outstanding for reducing vehicle crime. And 10 impact areas are showing reductions from theft and person. 12 impact areas have reduced under 25 violence with injury year to date. And the crime severity score in most impact areas, 10 out of 19, has also been reduced, and that's up until November 2021. Neighbourhood teams utilise WN Now across all neighbourhoods. We've worked with corporate communications, and we've currently run a private pilot to improve the content, timing and frequency of messages that have been put out. And initial findings from this, you'll see from the paper, are very promising, and we'll be looking at rolling this out more broadly in 2022. And in order to ensure that we continue to eliminate unlawful discrimination, harassment and victimisation, we're rolling out a significant number of equality assessment training programs across all departments in West Midlands Police, but specifically across local policing. So we'll have several trained assessors in local policing, scrutinising policies, plans and tactics. And we'll continue to listen and learn from our communities to make sure that we aren't discriminating against any particular community. So again, you'll see from the paper that neighbourhood policing and community policing is essential to improving trust and confidence and reducing neighbourhood crime and serious youth violence. The partnerships developed by neighbourhood teams and relationships built with local communities are critical for a genuine whole system approach to reducing intervention and prevention and harm reduction. I genuinely believe we've got some fantastic officers and staff leading and delivering in this area. I'm incredibly proud and excited at the prospects of the next 12 months, especially with the Commonwealth Games and the City of Culture in Coventry. So that's a kind of very brief overview of the paper. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Assistant Chief Constable. Are there any questions or comments arising from that presentation, please? Yes, Tom McNeil.
Thanks very much, Commissioner. I've got just a few short questions, but if I'm taking up too much time, then please feel free to shut me up. But they are short, so we'll see how I get on. The first thing was just a very quick comment to say, in this paper, it really is excellent to see what a strong commitment there is to community policing that comes through, and a description about how it fits into WMP's strategy. And that's clear from the recruitment of cadets and the growth of cadets right through to new officers. So that's really, really positive to see. So these questions aren't negative, they're just kind of exploring a bit further about some particular issues. Do you think that officers and community police officers in particular are still taking sufficient advantage of some of the diversion opportunities that are funded by the PCC's office? So I'm talking about diverting particularly young people for minor drug possession towards support and potentially treatment if there's an addiction issue, or for example the New Chance programme, which is designed to steer vulnerable women away from the criminal justice system where there's issues like domestic abuse and poverty towards help. I'm hearing that sometimes these opportunities aren't being used quite as much as we might be expecting them to, and there's not enough referrals. Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, so I do. I think you're absolutely right. I think we are always increasing our ability to look at out-of-court disposals and alternative pathways from criminal justice. There are, I would suggest, examples across some of our MPUs, so Birmingham East, Sandwell, Coventry. There's some really good examples of where we are using diversionary tactics. But there are other MPUs where we're not as strong in that particular area. So part of my challenge for next year and part of the professionalisation of neighbourhood policing will be to look at how we can roll those programmes out more broadly across our neighbourhood teams, provide staff with the right training and awareness and support so that they all start to pick up on some of the opportunities, so we can look at how we can divert more people away from the criminal justice system. So yeah, I would agree. I think there's pockets of really good work, but we need to look at how we can consistently roll that out more broadly.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, the key here is both Divert and New Chance, for example, and they're certainly not the only ones, have had amazing results as well at reducing reoffending and therefore preventing victimisation. The other question, this will be my only one I ask now because I can see other people got their hands up. Thank you for mentioning that point in the paper about moving away from the street triage scheme around tackling people with mental ill health towards this kind of new version of mental health tactical advisors. I know some people will have read that and been a bit worried about that change and what it means. So are you able to give us any assurance that this isn't going to result in some kind of reduced response to people with a mental ill health crisis?
Yeah, so Tom, I can give you that assurance. I mean, if I'm honest, when I first read that, my initial reaction was one of concern. So I did kind of dig a bit deeper into that and spoke to our mental health lead. But I can reassure you that the Mental Health Tactical Advisor Initiative will train significantly more officers across all departments. So not just local policing, force response, public protection, force CID, contact colleagues as well, will all get a significant uplift in training around mental health. many of them to the same level as the current street triage programme that we run. So the awareness that that will bring to more staff on the front line will be far broader than we currently have. And then, of course, you've got the fact that those officers will then be able to cascade and pass on some of that learning and awareness to their colleagues more broadly as well. So I too was slightly concerned when I heard that, but I have to say I'm incredibly reassured. And I think part of the challenge for us is to make sure we get the right number of people in the right places trained, and that we do cascade that more broadly.
Can I just add on the back of that, Tom? So I know this particularly has raised some specific concerns in black and ethnic minority communities as well, and we can all understand why that will be the case, because we have seen examples, haven't we, where the police interaction with people suffering mental health crisis in the black community has led to some occasions where people have died. And the way we've tried to move away from a kind of into a multi-agency approach has been one I know those communities welcome, but have more nervousness. So we've done more engagement, I think, particularly through some of our reference groups on this, and we'll continue to do. I do think it is a better answer. I think the triage was the right answer once. I think we should be in a different position now with healthcare providers and what they're doing. But what we do need to do is grow the level of professional understanding about how to respond. And I think this is the right policy approach. It's more in line with where other forces have gone in terms of the work we're doing. And we just got to keep, I think, our eye on it and continuing to talk up and brief communities, particularly those who are most nervous around it. And we have definitely seen that with black communities.
Thanks ever so much for that. Really appreciate the assurance. I definitely think, you know, when you've kind of rolled it out, and if you could report back and kind of tell us what you think and how well it's going, that would be really, really valuable. Thanks for that.
Thanks very much, Tom. Going to take questions in the following order. Firstly, Nikki Brennan, then Kath Hannon, and then Bhupinder Garkul, please. Nikki.
Thank you, Commissioner. I was very happy to see the section on training and development for victims of domestic abuse, coercive control and sexual assault. I was just wondering if I could have some more detail about how many officers will be trained, especially on the domestic abuse matters.
Yes, so I'm just looking through to see, so I can give you more detail on the training and the departments that will be involved in that, Nikki. The exact numbers, I can go away and find out the details of that and come back to you if that's okay. But I can give you details of the training if you would like that now.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so in terms then of our ability to kind of identify and understand domestic abuse, coercive control and sexual assault, we've got a number of CPD training events that are given to officers and staff. So there's a 2-day rape and serious sexual offence course that is provided to complex staff and child investigation officers. This looks at supporting sexual assault complaints and referrals to the sexual assault centres and specialist third-party services. We've got our neighbourhood policing teams have a 3-hour input on training days around responding to rape and serious sexual offences. This is also being rolled out to force response officers as well. But at the moment, our force response officers get a 15-minute briefing input, which includes specific signposting, again on sexual assault centres, specialist support organisations and initial response to these types of crimes. A domestic abuse matters programme is also running, where we have trained several champions to deliver this training to domestic abuse teams within our public protection unit. And we're also recommending that response officers have something bespoke designed for them more broadly over the course of 2022. And also our public protection leaders have provided training inputs around domestic abuse, stalking, coercion and control to officers in a number of frontline departments. And on top of that, Nikki, there are 7 other mandated NCAL packages which all touch upon either domestic abuse, sexual assault, coercive control, stalking, etc., which are also outlined in the paper.
Thank you, Assistant Chief Constable. Kath, would you like to ask your question, please?
Yes, thank you. I've got two questions for you, Richard. The first really is to echo what Tom has said about the breadth and depth of positive change that's taken place through community policing. It's really good to see all the work that's been done. However, at other meetings I've been to, there seems to be a trend towards diverting neighbourhood officers into, or them being drawn away from their work to support other areas of policing. So what impact is that having on neighbourhood activities is the first question. And the second question is there's a reference to an app for the management of high-risk offenders. Could you describe the purpose of the app and how it will enhance public safety?
So, Kathy, if I touch the first bit, just in terms of neighbourhood officers, just in terms of the work that, so I think it's really important the public understand we as the paper shows, we are a high spender on neighbourhood policing compared to most forces, so we choose to have a higher number. It's also worth saying that higher number spend, our neighbourhood officers also don't do certain tasks we'd expect to see in other forces. So, for example, they do not routinely carry crime investigations. We made a distinct decision as we went through the forces structural change to make sure that they were dedicated to that work. They also aren't abstracted in a way that we might see in other forces. So, for example, in the old structure the force had, where the response teams were very much the local policing commanders area, if we were short on the night shift for response officers, it would be the neighbourhood officers we'd have to draw. So our actual control of abstractions is very tight. It's also monitored regularly. So our mission support superintendents who control the daily demand through the force will actually assess precisely how many neighbourhood officers have been asked to support other areas of force work. And that's very carefully monitored by the work we do. So we've got a big number of neighbourhood officers compared to most forces. Their abstraction is quite controlled as to what they can be drawn out to do, and we monitor it very tightly. You are, however, right to say that particularly over the last year, that because we've gone through an extraordinary time through COVID, we had a summer of extraordinary level of demand, we've had extra pressures on COVID enforcement. We have had to lean a little bit more into our neighbourhood officers to assist us with more calls of service than we would ordinarily like. Now, what we do need to say about that is, of course, neighbourhood officers on their beats and areas responding to calls for service is also part of their job. They, as I like to say, everybody's got police on the anorak, so we will join in and we get stuck into things, and we should do. But we have had a slightly higher demand on them for that period. We have been weaning that down considerably. And so at the moment, on average, neighbourhood policing units are asked to assist us, I think, at the moment, for about 10 calls for service jobs that we've got in the system that we won't get cleared without their help a day, which is relatively small given the neighbourhood officer numbers we've got. So that pressure is definitely easing at the moment. But of course, it is a very busy time, and it's important we also don't see the neighbourhood officer's role as too narrow. You know, we have PCSOs to do the community engagement. We want our neighbourhood officers, of course, to play a vibrant and engaged part of the communities, but we also want them out crime fighting, targeting hotspot areas, arresting outstanding offenders. That is very much part of their core role. So the reassurance is we have a good number and we'll expand that number. We monitor the abstraction very carefully. It has been a harder year for neighbourhoods, but actually we do have a broader crime fighting expectation on the neighbourhood officers as well. Rich, do you want to cover off the app?
Yeah. So the comment in the paper, Kath, reducing harm in our communities by creating apps to better understand and effectively deal with higher risk offenders. You may be aware that we've recently implemented a new blueprint for our offender management teams. So that is currently being delivered, and within that blueprint we have three cohorts: the free, the fixed, and the flexed cohorts. Now you'll be aware more than most, Kath, around our obligations under MARAC and MAPA in terms of understanding who the most serious violent offenders are and how we manage those, and our sex offenders also. But the flex cohort in there does give us an opportunity to, as it says, flex and have a cohort of offenders that we manage locally that we think are the highest harm offenders to us. And we're running a number of pilots at the moment across a couple of the MPUs, whereby we are looking at scoring and tiering these offenders. Many of them are involved in acquisitive crime or neighbourhood crimes as they are now. But there are others that are in there that may be violent crime offenders, domestic abuse offenders as well. So these apps will be designed to help us score, tier, and then provide opportunities not just for our offender managers, but for our neighbourhood officers as well, to have more of an input into how we manage those offenders. So those pilots are running at the moment, the blueprint's landed, and it's something that we're looking at establishing through our through the apps to help us manage that process.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you for both those very full answers.
Thank you, Kath. Bhupinder, would you like to ask your question, and then we'll come to Jonathan Jardine?
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. Two very quick questions I've got here is one, can we have a breakdown? I have asked this previously. New recruits that we get in, the new intakes that we get in, officers, PCSOs, can we have a breakdown on gender, ethnicity, backgrounds, age, just to give us an idea of, are we attracting, what different communities are we attracting? Are we appealing to communities? And secondly, recruitment. You may have already looked at this. I'm not 100% sure, but if you have, then obviously you can tell me. When we recruit a police officer and when we recruit a PCSO, when we have a PCSO, when that PCSO goes on to be a police officer, is it not better recruiting more PCSOs and then moving on to being a police officer? That way, I think we're losing less people, as when we recruit PCs, maybe a year into the job, maybe 6 months into the job, we have a mass exodus, and the saying is, well, it's not for me. Whereas a PCSO is actually doing the work, he's working with communities, he or she is familiar with what's expected of being a police officer. Does that make sense?
Yes, so I'll pick the question. The first thing is that the demographics of new recruits, we share with the Commissioner once a month a report on that. So I think if the Commissioner's office can share that with you as board members, we do provide that on a regular basis. I think just to emphasise points, we're kind of generally around about 40% of our recruits are female at the moment, which is very positive. We'd like to push that up to close to 50-50. And we're recruiting just under 30% of our current cohorts are from Black and ethnic minority communities. There's more work to do there still. There's definitely more work to do specifically on attraction of more Black recruits, and we're constantly looking at ways to do that. We're currently in a short period, the last 2 months, where we've not had any new recruits into the force. It's a conscious pause point, but we start recruiting again in January. So we are kind of working through that. So we do provide and we share that information. In terms of police officers and PCSOs, I think a few bits. We have a very low resignation rate as a force compared to most forces. So most people who join policing stay with policing. We actively monitor and we're doing a lot of work because we've got an awful lot of recruits. We will inevitably have some people who join us who it's not the job for them. Recruits these days are frankly under a lot more pressure than the olden days when I joined. They are having to study for either a diploma or a degree level qualification, as well as do what is a very busy and demanding job. And as a result, we're trying to look very hard to monitor not only the students' performance as operational officers, but how they're progressing with the coursework they're required to do as part of their training. And there's a lot of work going into that, particularly because we do recognise, not just with the academic and the professional, but with busy personal lives, that can be very challenging, I think, sometimes for staff. So we manage that very carefully. Our attrition rate is generally very low, but you're right, there will be some people who join us who it's not quite what they thought. We're always very keen when we see PCSOs join us because you're right, many people see that as a job to put their foot in the door, to see whether they like policing. It's not quite a full policing job. I have to say, I would rather those people try policing first, rather, because what we do want to do, of course, is retain long-standing PCSOs in communities who understand the community very well. And we've got some outstanding PCSOs. Some of them are, much older than the general workforce, people in their 60s and a recent case in their 70s, who are out there bringing their whole life experience with an absolute focus on being the best PCSO they can be for their community. And so we very much want to recruit more people like that, more people who are older and in their second careers, much more people who want to stay and be a PCSO rather than joining with a view to being an officer, because those roles are fundamental and pivotal to building good relationships with the community. It's also the same with special constables. There will be a proportion of the specials that are joining because they fancy being regulars, and it's a good foot in the door for them. But again, our special constable recruitments, all we've got to try and make sure that what we're not doing with those jobs is creating just simply feeders for police officer roles. I think that balance is broadly right at the moment, but we, and we are getting some very, very good recruits into the force. But it's always a balance of not trying to use jobs like PCSOs and actually contact handlers as kind of recruitment pools for regular officers, because that just creates pressures elsewhere on what are pivotal jobs.
Thank you. Can I just quickly add on? That's really refreshing to hear that, Chief, that there's a lot of the people my age, shall I say, put it mildly, that are joining up who want to make a career of a PCSO. That's really refreshing, and I'm glad to hear that. Thanks for that. Thanks for your answer.
Thanks very much, Bhupinder. Jonathan Jardine, please.
Thanks, Commissioner. Linking actually to the question that Kath asked relating to the apps that are becoming available to support community policing, the reference of Para 34 to the ability to better understand the effectiveness of community policing, so the increased amount of management information, such as the targeted patrol time app. How will the force be using this information to develop and improve community policing and local policing at the individual team and kind of neighborhood level? What's the mechanism for capturing that information and using it to improve the sort of outcomes that are achieved by neighborhood policing?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. So, in essence, the particular app you're talking about, the targeted patrol app, I think, and several of the senior leaders think this could be a real game changer for senior leaders. So, it will enable senior leaders to understand at kind of GPS level where their officers are patrolling and have patrolled over a particular shift. So, when we look at for instance, our violent crime hotspot areas, or our areas where we know burglary might be prolific over a period of time, we can ensure that our officers are out and about in those areas at the right time, in the right place, stopping the right people. Because you'll appreciate the link then between, for instance, the stop and search app. We'll be able to kind of cross-reference those two apps as well to understand, are they stopping the right people? We'll be able to look at the intelligence that's being submitted by those officers and understand where that intelligence has been submitted from. The officers were out and about in a high-level hotspot area involving violent crime or burglary. You would expect some kind of stop and search data or intelligence to be submitted on the back of that. At the moment, we can do some of this, but it's kind of painstaking, almost, paper records almost. It's not quite that bad, but we certainly can't do it as effectively, as efficiently as we would want to. So in terms of having that kind of scrutiny and understanding where our officers are at any particular time, I do think this will be a real game changer for our local neighbourhood policing teams, and making sure we get the balance right between, as the Chief said, that crime fighting element of what they are there to deliver and the community engagement element as well. It will also help us better understand if they're getting called off from their neighbourhoods to deal with demand. It will help us better understand where that demand is coming from, what they're dealing with and how they're dealing with it as well.
But just come back on that, Commissioner. I think it also offers potentially significant potential for kind of natural experiments of comparative approaches in different areas and seeing what the impact is by different operational models and tactics in different locations over time, and sort of get that sense of how it impacts therefore on the overall harm picture in different localities.
Thank you, Jonathan. I don't see anybody else indicating with any questions or comments. So I just have one question. Assistant Chief Constable, are you able to elaborate on how community police officers are allocated to neighbourhood policing units? How is that determined? And is the any allocation formula that are utilised for that purpose still reflective of local demand and risk at the moment?
Commissioner, probably best I pick that up because I'm more familiar when we've run those. So we do run a variety of methods to assess, you know, to a large degree, socio-economic factors that would indicate higher policing demand issues, alongside some of our crime data as well, to ensure we have an allocation around it, largely on the neighbourhood officers, and that's weighted then against the neighbourhoods individually. Across the top of that, the NPUs have also got a level of proactive capability that they'll need to have, the neighbourhood task forces. That's not allocated quite the same way. That tends to be a little bit more based upon scale and threat that we would assess, but also, frankly, every neighbourhood policing unit needs a level of capability against that. As we've allocated specifically on the first 2 years of uplift a number of extra resources based upon some of the engagement work, some of the schools work, some of the work around proactivity, and some of the work around building capacity around organised crime and gangs on those neighbourhood policing teams. As we go into year 3 of the uplift, that we'll clearly be looking very hard, and we will be making some further investments clearly around neighbourhood policing that area. And I think it will be an appropriate and right time for us just to rerun that model then, just to relook at what the level of demand is across those areas. We've also prioritised, as you've heard from Rich, the impact areas, so we know they are the standout areas with more resilient crime and social demographic issues. We've done a level of allocation specifically into those neighbourhoods. So there is a formula that's worked through. We probably would be due to rerun it again in for year 3 of the uplift, and we'll happily share that with your office as to how we've done that.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. I don't see anybody else indicating that they have any further comments or questions. So that just leaves me to thank you very much, Assistant Chief Constable Richard Baker, for your presentation. It's much appreciated. Thank you. Over the past decade, community policing in the West Midlands has been dismantled as a consequence of central government having imposed significant funding cuts on our policing service. That was a big mistake. It was counterproductive and a false economy. And we've all been paying the price with less justice, safety and security in the West Midlands, because we need preventative, proactive, problem-solving and visible community policing in the West Midlands. We have to rebuild community policing. That's why I'm committed to rebuilding community policing. It's a top priority in my police and crime plan that I launched last month. I've committed to an extra 450 police officers to be allocated to community policing to keep people, their families and our communities safe and secure. And over the coming months and years, with my plans, we'll see more officers visible out on the streets, embedded in communities to help prevent and tackle crime and keep people safe. And to support our young people, 25 schools-based officers will be introduced, and a further 37 officers will be assigned to working with young people and families through early help schemes. And as well as that, to divert young people on the cusp of criminality away from crime, another 38 officers will be based in pupil referral units, all of which is most welcome. So that takes us to agenda item 6, which is procurement. And that is to be presented by Devinder Jagpal, who is Assistant Director for Finance. Devinder, by all means, proceed to make your presentation, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. So what I'll do is I'll just take you through the paper. The strategy itself is appendix to the paper. So just summarising the paper itself. So it provides you with the details of the joint procurement strategy. That's obviously between West Midlands Police and the Police and Crime Commissioner. And it takes us from 2022 to 2025. The procurement strategy itself builds on the themes which were present in the previous strategy, and more importantly, the requirements which have been set out in the Commissioner's Police and Crime Plan and the West Midlands Police 3-year strategy, This Work Matters. The overall procurement vision remains to deliver the high quality and cost effective service which assists in the performance of the force, whilst delivering value for the people of West Midlands and assisting in the economic development of the region. And we'll talk a little bit later about sort of social value further down in the paper. The procurement strategy going forward, as I said, has similar themes to previous strategies, but what's different about this strategy is the stronger focus on the green agenda and collaboration. I mean, as a force, we've been very strong with the whole agenda of collaboration, which was clearly demonstrated through the change programme. But the emphasis on collaboration here is more about, again, the social value piece and how we can work with our supply chain to deliver on the social value agenda. Just taking you further down into the paper, so as I said earlier, the strategy recognises the progress made in the previous strategy period, and we aim to build on the achievements to date. There have been a number of changes regarding procurement regulation over the last few years, and probably there's been a ramp up in those changes in sort of the last 12 months or so, namely Brexit. I mean, I won't go into a huge amount of detail, but there's been some changes with regards to how we advertise opportunities for procurement. So moving away from the OJU process and moving towards the new UK process of find a tender service. There's been a couple of policy statements which have been issued. The ones I'll probably draw your attention to is around, I suppose, firstly, the change in financial thresholds for public procurement. The value has changed, and from the 1st of January 2022, the relevant thresholds will now include VAT as opposed to previously it was excluded. There's a procurement policy note 0521, which was a national procurement policy statement around creating, taking into account those national priorities in your local procurement activities around creating new businesses, new jobs and new skills, obviously tackling climate change and reducing waste, but also improving supply diversity, innovation and resilience. There is a green paper which I'd like to draw your attention to as well, which is called Transforming Public Procurement. It talks about quite significant changes going forwards. It is only a green paper at this moment in time, but I think during the COVID period, the Cabinet Office have recognised that more agility is required around procurement, but also some sort of broader thinking around using digital platforms and making the process, as I said, more agile, more dynamic, and looking a bit more broadly around different priorities other than value for money. The strategy touches on our commitment to social value. So in line with the Police and Crime Plan, achieving social value is a key priority. We already include social value as part of our assessment criteria for contracts over £100,000. Going forwards, we're looking to build that into any contracts which are extended. We have the tools in place to capture social value targets, which our suppliers have taken a commitment to deliver. What we want to do going forwards is just try and work with our supply chain a little bit more to think again a little bit more creatively about what those social value opportunities can be. A little bit on contract management. Again, we've obviously got contract management processes in place. at the front end of this year, we started to roll out an enhanced framework to manage those relationships in a structured way with a clear methodology on why we were investing certain resources with certain suppliers in terms of time and effort. We'll continue to roll this approach out across all contracts. And I think the most important thing there is about, once we've collated the data about supply performance, is to, making sure that we use that data to inform our decisions going forward in a more robust way. Earlier on, I talked about collaborative working. We will and we do work with Blue Light Commercial Services in sharing our procurement pipeline to try and identify opportunities for better ways of procuring and delivering procurement savings for the force. The final thing I just wanted to point out, I suppose, is the green agenda, obviously very topical and will continue to be a priority not only for the government, but needs to be a priority for all organisations. We will work with our environment and sustainability lead to support the PCC's and West Midlands Police broader decarbonisation ambitions and work with our supply chain to feed into these commitments. So the board is asked to consider and approve the joint procurement strategy, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Devinder. We have questions firstly from Kath Hannon and then from Tom McNeil. Kath.
Thank you, Devinder. Regarding the new process finder tender service, has there been a difference in the quantity and quality of applications that are available for the procurement process?
Do you want me to answer that? Not that we've noticed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Devinder. Tom, would you like to ask your question, please?
Yeah, thanks very much for that presentation, Devinder, and for kind of emphasising the importance of social value and obviously the importance of reducing carbon emissions, which obviously the two relate strongly. Social value can include all of that. I know West Midlands Police have kind of been working quite hard to embed social value in their procurement for a few years now. So I suppose, just being honest, I'd kind of hope by now to see a bit more of a presentation on the kind of social value you've captured, because I know some of the partners you worked with to build it into your procurement strategies was partly designed to capture, say, local jobs or the number of additional people being paid the real living wage and so on. So could you provide a bit more context around that, please?
Yeah, so we use the social value portal to capture social value commitments and delivery against those commitments. Sorry, I don't have the detail with me, but I can. Each year we provide you with an annual report which sets out the performance against those targets. So I haven't got the numbers to hand, but I can tell you the number of jobs which have been created locally as part of that social value commitment. I can tell you the number of apprenticeships which have been created as part of that social value commitment. But I don't have that to hand at this point in time, but I can produce a report which shows you that. But you would have had the performance for the last few years. It would have come to this board during the year as scheduled.
Yeah, thanks. Because I just think it's a quick comment and then I'll be quiet. I think it is really important we find good ways of communicating that to the public, because obviously the police have had huge cuts, and that's meant lots of police officers are lost. And some will suggest that that's because the police are inefficient, where actually the government's independent inspectorate shows that West Midlands Police are extremely efficient and have done that repeatedly. And then the fact that you're also bringing in additional investment because you're doing procurement cleverly. We just really want to make sure we get that information out there so people know that you're real leaders despite crippling austerity. So thanks ever so much for your answer.
That's okay, and this strategy does acknowledge that and does commit to actually publicising our social value performance going forward. So on the back of this strategy, I'll be putting together a plan and specific measures, and we'll be reporting those back to the appropriate board on a periodic basis.
Thanks very much, Tom. We have a question from Jonathan Jardine. Jonathan.
Thank you, Commissioner. Devinder, so in the police and crime plan, we talk about two areas I want to touch on with you. One is the potential for working with other public bodies locally to kind of maximise social value potential. We pick out the combined authority particularly, but it could apply equally to local authorities and other public sector organisations. First of all, then, what's your assessment of the potential for achieving greater social value by kind of collaborative approaches, or either best practice or in terms of actual procurements with other public bodies? That's my first question. And then secondly, we also touch on the issue of modern slavery and reducing it and minimising it and preventing it in the supply chain. What steps is the force taking to address that issue in its procurement work?
Okay, so on the first question about working with other public bodies, at the moment, I haven't explored that. It's obviously something we want to explore. So going forwards early on in next year, I will be looking at that. I'm sorry, I haven't got a complete answer for you now, but we do have the same appetite as you to do that. Anything which, adds value to what we're doing, or, creates cost savings, or, achieves a better outcome, that's something we will be exploring. On the modern slavery piece, so as part of our terms and conditions at the moment, we ask suppliers to confirm their compliance with the Modern Slavery Act itself. We also ask them to do the necessary due diligence for any subcontractors that they use as part of delivering a service to us. This year, what we're going to do is we're actually going to map out our supply chain in terms of their potential exposure to modern slavery. And then once we've mapped that out, sort of created a heat map, we will then take forwards sort of a plan in terms of how we approach our supply chain and what our expectations will be from them in order for them to demonstrate further that their compliance with the Modern Slavery Act. In addition to that, I've been working with Blue Light Commercial Services on training for the procurement team. So Blue Light Commercial Services has a training database which we now have access to, and just within sort of the last couple of weeks, my team have completed the modern slavery e-learning package just to refresh their knowledge on that. Does that answer your question, Jonathan?
Yeah, Devinder, thank you. That's a good answer. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. I don't see anybody else indicating with any questions or comments.
Commissioner, can I just have a...
Oh, yes, of course, Chief.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, obviously there's a lot of work gone into this, and we really welcome the work on joint procurement strategy. I did just want to thank Devinder for her work on this. She's, has had a busy job being the finance director of Thoughts and has taken on this particular area as well, relatively recently with changes. So I'm just really grateful. I thought the presentation was really good. The work jointly done with your office is of a very high standard. I just wanted to thank her for what she's done.
Thanks very much for that, Chief. Devinder, yes, I just have a couple of questions. Are you able just to outline the requirements for suppliers to be real living wage compliant? I mean, how is that implemented? How does that happen in practice? Yeah, so with the real living wage, it applies to certain suppliers. So it applies to those suppliers who work for the force for 2 or more hours per week for 8 consecutive weeks. And also, sorry, the other condition is that they actually work on the force premises or a property owned by the force. And this is fed into our assessment process, so we ask for confirmation of adherence to the living wage where appropriate. So for us, it would be appropriate where in areas like manned guarding, temporary staff, catering services, property services, and healthcare in custody. I suppose are the ones I can think of on the top of my head. That's really helpful. Thank you, Devinder. Just a further question. Do you think that there's been an impact as a consequence of blue light commercial services in terms of procurement activities for West Midlands Police? And do you think there's been any recognisable benefits that blue light has provided locally in the West Midlands?
Yeah, I mean, blue light commercial services, you know, are leading on a couple of national contracts. I suppose the ones which sort of come to mind is the fleet contract, and it's about standardising the requirements and setting national standards. I suppose the big piece of work which we're hoping to benefit from going forwards is the sustainability agenda and the sort of the requirements they're exploring around that. Those are probably the two things which come to mind now. But you know, we're hoping any work that we're doing, we're hoping to benefit from that. We're sharing our procurement pipeline with them, so we can align the timings of new contract awards, so we can benefit from any sort of national collaborations as opposed to going in as a single force.
Thanks, Devinder. Just a couple of other quick questions, if I might. Firstly, are you able to provide any further details on how the contract management that the force undertakes operates once contracts are let?
Yeah, so I mean, we've always had contract management in place since the start of this year. I referred earlier on to sort of our supplier relationship management framework. So it's a framework which provides a structured approach to dealing with internal and external relationships. Once the contract's awarded, what we do is we segment suppliers in terms of sort of in terms of risk and impact to the force, and then we tailor our approach to sort of review meetings around that segmentation. So, for example, if they're a platinum supplier, you'd have more frequent meetings with them. You know, you'd be in constant dialogue with them. Whereas a sort of a bronze supplier, the frequency of meetings probably would be less frequent. So it's you know, there's a framework there, and the approach is dependent on what segment the particular supplier sits in.
Thanks very much for that, Devinder. Then just finally from me, just a question around sustainability and reducing the carbon footprint of West Midlands Police. Yeah. Are you able to give any illustrations or examples or ideas that the force is currently working on in order to improve sustainability and reduce the carbon footprint of West Midlands Police in relation to procurement?
Yeah, I mean, it's something, you know, we've sort of dipped our toes into, and there have been some successes around it. I think going forward, we are starting to have discussions with our suppliers around sort of packaging reduction, thinking about sort of the material that they're using in packaging, trying to encourage the sort of more recyclable material. Reductions in sort of fuel usage by consolidating deliveries is probably another one. And then how we just think a little bit more about how we're disposing and recycling some of our things, whether that's IT or uniform and equipment. You know, there's obviously the bigger piece is about increasing the use of electric vehicles. But as you're probably aware, you know, we had our settlement details last week. There's no additional funding to support that agenda. So I think we're going to, you know, there's some quick wins, which I've just mentioned, but some of the bigger pieces probably require a bit more thought in terms of how we're going to support that change.
Thanks ever so much for that, Devinder. Don't see anybody else indicating that they have any further comments or questions. So just remains for me to say, Devinder, thank you so much for your attendance at the board this morning. It's much appreciated, and thank you for your presentation. Thank you. So, I mean, each year West Midlands Police has to procure £90 million of goods, works and services, as well as ensuring value for money. It's important that social value is secured too, and that means companies should pay the real living wage, local jobs should be supported, and environmental sustainability is properly prioritised, and that wider value to the community is considered too. And this is definitely an area that I'll be keeping under close scrutiny in the time to come. So that now brings us to agenda item 7, which is our youth commissioners, and a very warm welcome to all of our youth commissioners who've attended this morning. This item is to be presented by Mary Jacobs from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, however with contributions from, I believe, 5 of our youth commissioners. So Mary, if you're able to commence the presentation of this item and introduce our youth commissioners, please.
Thank you, Commissioner. We are running a little ahead of time, so I have communicated with all of the commissioners that they do need to come on now. Not all of them are on yet, but hopefully if I do my initial 3 minutes, they will all be logging on in time for me to introduce them. So I will begin now. So good morning, everyone. The purpose of the report this morning is to introduce the latest cohort of youth commissioners to you and give you a flavour of the activity that they've been involved in since they were elected in the July of this year. And as the Commissioner said, a number of the youth commissioners will help me co-present some of that activity to yourselves, but indeed I will introduce all of those that are on here shortly to you. So the background to the Youth Commission is included in the terms of reference, which are appended to the report in front of you. And they have a number of roles. One is to represent the young people in their area and to consult with them in relation to policing and crime, and to join other youth voice across the force area. They also act as the eyes and ears for the Commissioner and for Wasim Ali as the Assistant Police and Crime Commissioner, and in particular around the Police and Crime Plan. And then they also are expected to build a relationship with their neighbourhood policing teams in their local areas, to connect with other community safety partners in their local areas, to question and to hold them to account in relation to the issues that are important for young people. The Youth Commission therefore represents a very rich resource and is made up of a diverse, engaged group of young people. And I'm proud to say that their access to our information, to our policy, and to policing means that adds to their own self-development and contributes to their skills. And currently, we certainly have 3 individuals employed in the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office that are former youth commissioners, and I certainly know of an equal number, if not more, who are now employed with West Midlands Police. So I will go with introductions of who I can see are in the room now, and I may be still missing some. So I will go on the list of who I can see. For Birmingham, I have Alicia. Alicia, are you in the room? No? I'll come back to Alicia. Alicia represents Birmingham West. Is Soban Shan in the room? No, Soban's not on yet. He represents Birmingham West. I'm looking at the names as I read these out. I can't see Tiana or Wasi from Birmingham. I believe Sylvia is on. Sylvia, would you like to introduce yourself? If you'd like to unmute. Sylvia? Okay, I'll move on. Ria, I can see you in the room. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ria and I represent Sandwell.
Thank you, Ria. Mohammed, I'm aware you're on. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mohammed and I represent Sandwell.
Thank you, Mohammed. Tony from Dudley, would you like to introduce yourself?
Very good morning to you all. I am Anthony Alexander and I represent Dudley.
Thank you, Tony. Aman.
Hello all, I'm also from Dudley. Oh, my name's Aman, sorry.
I have one apology for Jaspinder Kaur from Wolverhampton. Unfortunately, she's attending hospital this morning. Who else can I see on? Zara, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning, I'm Zara and I represent Solihull.
And Rabia, I can see your face there.
Good morning, my name is Rabia and I represent Solihull.
Would anybody else that I have missed out like to say hello now in case I've missed your faces?
Good morning, my name is Eniola Adekunle and I represent Coventry.
Thank you very much, Eniola. Anybody else I've missed out on that's here? And hopefully some more will come in time. Okay, without delaying the meeting any further, we have a selection on and I hope more will join us. As the report outlines, it was with great regret that the Youth Summit, which is normally a function that the Youth Commissioners help organise and host each year, had to be postponed due to the threat of Omicron this year. And we hope to hold that in the spring now. So originally, the subject that we were going to present to you this morning would have been a video footage from that event and talking about the outcomes from it. So to replace that, we've selected a few youth commissioners just to speak to you in more detail about what talents they bring and the activities they've been involved in. So I'd like to move on to that now. And the first person I'd like to introduce is Aman. Aman, would you like to say your piece? Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Mary. Just as beginning, so I joined the Youth Commissioner role as a natural progression from my previous community activities I've done in Dudley, such as playing part in Dudley Youth Council, being the Deputy Member of Youth Parliament, but also roles I've played within secondary schools and Dudley College Student Union as well. So the mandate I put forward for the role was making sure that members of the society knew their stop and search rights, as well as building trust and confidence in the police with young members of society and reducing violence towards women and girls. So at this year's Youth Summit, which Mary said is being postponed, I would be introducing the item on violence against women and girls by highlighting how useful the MVP programme, so that's the mental violence in prevention scheme, could be used to encourage respect and responsibility in society by being upstanders and not bystanders. So I am a trained MVP ambassador, so I do want to give something back to my community and work with the VRU to accelerate the delivery of this programme in Dudley schools in particular. I am proud to have this role in Dudley, where I can see that there is a well-established connection with the neighbourhood police teams, the Community Safety Partnership Board, youth services, and its network of schools and further education as well.
Thank you very much, Aman. Eniola, would you like to go next? Thank you.
My name is Eniola, and before I came to the role of Youth Commissioner, I was actively involved in social justice groups in my local community, especially leading one in my school. My role, I worked in the local community library, creating resources to assist the transition between primary and secondary school reading levels. I also organised and moderated online debates, which really helped me understand different point of views and sympathise with other people. In my role of the Youth Commissioner, I want to make a difference concerning racism, knife crime and mental health support for young people. I've also pressed to be able to witness a West Midlands Police stop and search, which I think will be very useful for me, because most stuff that you see about stop and search is just the extremely bad cases that you see circulated on social media. I enjoyed a workshop in November on Stop and Search that Natalie Cox and Shees Malik provided to the youth commissioners. I am now pleased with the negotiations that Mary, Natalie and Shees have made with the Operation Guardian, that we are going to be offered the chance to go out on patrol. It's important that I play a part in holding the police to account for disproportionate searches of Black minority ethnic citizens. And I'm going to attend the Stop and Search Commission on January 24th.
Thank you very much, Eniola. Rabia, are you available to speak, please?
Before I became a youth commissioner, I was a police cadet. Police Cadets is a scheme for young people aged between 13 to 17, and it gives them an insight into policing. It also gives them an opportunity to engage with other people. I joined Police Cadets because I want to learn how to keep my community safe, and this also led me to taking the opportunity of being a youth commissioner. I am passionate about making our communities safe and especially reducing knife crime, drug trafficking, and abuse of women and girls. I believe that the youth commissioner role is important, as the commissioner has someone to be his eyes and ears for young people in Solihull. I took part in the outreach youth consultation activity on the draft police and crime plan, and I found many insights very valuable. I became aware how misled many people were with regards to the police and how they were manipulated into believing negatively towards the police, especially due to social media and the negative impact it brings on people. I would like to build a bridge between young people and the police so they know that the police are here for our own safety. Solihull does not have a local authority youth club, but I am aware that a strong community and voluntary sector networks of youth organisations called YOBs is coming together. I am looking forward to myself and Zara making connections with them via the VRU Community Navigator, so we can better represent their issues to the Commissioner and our local police.
Thank you very much, Rabia. Mohammed, just before I bring you on, I'm aware that 2 other youth commissioners are now on board yet. Can I go to Tiana just to introduce yourself, please? Could you unmute and come on? Thank you. Tiana?
Hello, my name's Tiana Stewart and I'm Youth Commissioner Birmingham East. My camera's not currently working, so I can't speak.
That's fine, thank you. And Wasi, I can see that you're on. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Wasi Asid and I represent East Birmingham.
Thank you very much. If I can now go to Mohammed. Mohammed, would you like to do your piece now?
Hello, everyone. I'd like to start off by saying, imagine how great it is when you come into a role to discover that the people at the top took the exact same route you aspire to as a career route, interest in law and local politics, just like Simon Foster and Wasim Ali. Like Wasim, I'm starting on that path by becoming a member of the SHAPE youth organisation in Sandwell and getting elected as a youth commissioner. I understand that opportunities like this are hard to come across, and I will do everything I can to represent the voice of young people in Sandwell and in the Force area. I'm naturally disappointed that I'm speaking to you today without the experience of co-hosting my first youth summit with Renee from Warsaw. The event was and will be a really good example of youth commissioners playing a leadership role to combine youth voices, the police and crime plan, digital mapping from the VRU and neighbourhood police officers. Mary tells us the supper is good too. Joking aside, it's really important that the young people we represent have this chance to be heard on where they feel unsafe, and it's good for the police to know whether this presence will be that fear. I travel to school and back on a bus where violence has taken place on the top deck before, and many school kids experience this as well. So I welcome the safer travel theme too. And lastly, we are going to discuss what changes in society, in our personal attitudes, and most particularly males, need to be encouraged to reduce violence to women and girls. The Metropolitan Police have a controversial record with the Sarah Everard case, so I look forward to my own Chief Constable opening the Youth Summit, talking about being an upstander. We all want to work with the Commissioner and the OPCC on this issue, and I look forward to telling you about the outcomes of the Youth Summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. We did lose your volume slightly in when you were speaking, but I think people can ask afterwards if there's anything that they would like you to repeat. The last Youth Commissioner I'm trying to come to is is Amelia from Wolverhampton, and she's saying she's able to be on the meeting but is struggling for us to hear her. Amelia, can you just try and unmute, and we'll see if we can hear you. I can see you on the screen, but just try and see if you unmute that we have volume. No, it doesn't look like we can hear you, Amelia. Is there any technical support that can assist from our side, please?
No, I think it's her device that she's using. She's connected through audio.
Right, is there anything else we can advise her to try to get on from her device or not? No, okay, I'm going to improvise then. I'm aware, having assisted Amelia with her script, of what it would comprise. So with apologies, Amelia, I'm going to impersonate you now in order that I can get your script across. So I am Amelia from Wolverhampton, and Amelia came in with leadership qualities via the sporting world, being captain of many teams. And she was elected on a mandate which promised to focus on systems and communities, organisations, and how individuals can collectively reduce violent crime, including knife crime and domestic abuse. She wanted to tackle racial disproportionality in policing and build a stronger community, addressing equality, diversity, and human rights, and make a genuine and constructive difference to the lives of those in her city of Wolverhampton. One of the issues which Amelia has raised is that the Knife Angel was due to be erected in Wolverhampton in April 2020. And as well, everybody will be aware, we went into lockdown a month before that. So all of the planned activities which youth commissioners in Wolverhampton had organised to be part of the Knife Angel being in the city was missed out on. And she'd like to look at another way now that maybe a smaller, more portable item of public art might be used together with an anti-knife programme going around Wolverhampton schools. And she'd like to be part of that. So she still thinks it's critical, but without the huge Knife Angel, that would be a useful way forward. So she looks forward to working with Police Partnerships team, the VRU, and young people to see what is possible. So that was Amelia's piece. I've just got a couple more that I believe have come in since to introduce. Let me just scan the names that I missed out on before. Ria, are you able to come on microphone now? Ria from Samwell? No, we're still not. No. Okay, sorry for those technical difficulties. People are at home and on home Wi-Fi now, and we will be back to this now with people needing to communicate from home. So that concludes our introduction to the activities that we've been involved in, and would welcome any question to the youth commissioners or to myself now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mary, and thank you to all our youth commissioners who've managed to attend this morning. It's much appreciated, and particularly grateful to Aman, Eniola, Mohammed, and Amelia in her absence for those presentations. So that was brilliant. And we do have some comments and questions. I think Jonathan is first, and then Tom McNeil, and then Bhupinder Garkal. Jonathan.
Thanks, Commissioner, and thank you everybody for those presentations. I picked out from the presentations a clear focus on, for example, issues around disproportionality and equalities, stop and search being an example of that, and just an open question really to our youth commissioners that are on the meeting today around other areas that you think we should be prioritising for 2022? What are the key issues that you want to see Simon and the team here at the OPCC and in the force focusing on in the next year ahead?
Would any youth commissioner like to answer that?
I think that a really key topic that the police could focus on is violence against women and girls, because as we've seen with the Sarah Everard case, it can happen to anyone at any time, and the perpetrator can be literally anyone. And I think that the public really feel that not enough is being done to help women and girls and give us like a safe space like within the police.
Thank you, Eniola. Thank you. Bapinda and then Tom McNeil.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's just following on from that, what Jonathan just asked there. I wanted to ask the youth commissioners, what feedback are you getting from communities? I mean, obviously you're speaking to people much your age, they're communicating with you, they will be quite open and frank with you. Talking about domestic violence and fear in the home and violence against women and girls, what feedback are you getting that you think we're missing out on?
I wouldn't mind answering that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, please do, Mohammed.
I recently went to a youth parliament sort of briefing just to get an idea about what the youth parliament role was like, and just briefly we went over some issues that we personally felt should have been brought up, and I literally just briefly went over the topic of domestic violence and violence against women and young girls specifically, and I literally got a standing ovation from the young girls there, and it was such a pressing topic that they felt nobody had spoke about and nobody had gone in depth about, and it was something that hit very close to home with them. And then when I spoke to some of them after the event, they were telling me that this is a recurring issue that they face every single day, and they don't feel like they have anyone to speak to about it. And when they do speak about it, they're either told that it's not, they're making it out to be a bigger issue than it actually is, or their issues aren't taken seriously enough. So in terms of violence against women and young girls, I know very well that especially secondary school girls, even a lot of college girls too, when they hear especially young men talking about that, because whenever you hear that topic being brought up, typically is brought up by other young women because it's a lived personal experience. But when young men start to speak about it and they start to recognize it as a real issue and want things to be done, it's really boosting and motivating for young women and girls, especially from what I've seen.
That's a great answer. Thank you for that. Thanks for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mohammed. Tom, and then Kath, and then Nikki, please.
Thanks, Commissioner. Mine was just going to be an extremely quick comment to say thank you so much for having kind of put yourself forward, gone through the election process and giving up your time to do this role. And just, you know, the few short, you know, presentations that you gave, and I'm sure others would have had really good things to say as well. Genuinely, I really mean it, is quite inspiring, and your role models and the kind of leadership you're showing on these issues will cascade to other people that you know and that are friends with or that look up to you. And it's just a real powerful thing. So just hearing you present on it just makes me realise what a valuable thing having youth commissioners is. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Tom. Kath.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'd just like to echo the comments that Mohammed made. I saw an image on Instagram where somebody had written up on the wall, "Protect your daughters," and that had been crossed out, and below it was written, "Educate your sons." So within all this talk of violence against women and girls, there's got to be a place there for boys and men to be educated around the issues, and then pass that amongst themselves. So I think Mohammed is exactly right. If young men start talking, then women feel more protected anyway.
Thanks, Kath. Yes, Nikki.
Just an excuse to mention our campaign about no excuse for abuse and our billboards that are up in the West Midlands, which are about men being upstanders and not bystanders. And I think what Mohammed has said is kind of really rang true with that. And it'd be great to have the Youth Commissioner's involvement on any future work that we do on that.
Thanks very much, Nikki. Was there anyone else who wanted to raise any comments?
Can I just reply to
questions? Yes, of course, Mary, please.
Obviously, the violence against women and girls is a theme for the postponed youth summit, and we're exploring the options for that now. We would very much like to return to a face-to-face event if we can, and I'm also aware that our young people have a greater number of mock exams on their plates this year than ever before. So we're circumventing not doing it during exam time, but I'm hopeful towards the end of March we may get a window when they are exam free, that we could look at the warmer weather making a face-to-face event possible. But we watch on government restrictions on that. But at that point, I would hope that we will have an opening speech by the Chief Constable on being an upstander, and we will have external resources talking about violence against women and girls, and we'll have views from young people gathered there then as to what behaviours they think should be altered about violence against women and girls. And I would anticipate that domestic violence incidents and experience of that would be part of that topic. So very much welcome that input and an endorsement that theme will be a welcome one, and that board members would be invited to come and witness what young people are saying at that time. We will be welcoming Nikki to come to the Youth Commission early in the new year to come and speak about the campaign work that she's involved in order that Youth Commissioners are well versed in that. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Mary. I don't see anybody else indicating with any comments or questions. I just wondered, Chief Constable, I don't know if you have any thoughts or reflections on the contributions that we've heard from the Youth Commissioners at all that you'd like to contribute?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're very fortunate in the scheme that runs around Youth Commissioners. I think that it has been very difficult over the last few years because of COVID, but I'm amazed about how widely they get across the force and how many things they're involved in. We've heard today about stop search scrutiny panels, work with safer travel, and the rich views that are put in are always really welcomed by the force, because we easily forget, don't we? Young people are actually probably our biggest client base, the people we work with most, both in terms of victims, but also sadly in terms of offenders. And so that level of insight we get, I think, is really helpful. So it's just a general from me, a huge thank you for the work they do. It's really appreciated. It's we've had some good future recruits from our Youth Commissioners as well. But regardless whether or not people use the experience to go off and do other professions, they add huge value to policing during their term of office. So huge thank you from me for their work.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. That's very much appreciated. I don't see anybody else indicating with any further comments or questions. Just wondered if either Mary or any of our Youth Commissioners want to have make any final comments following their appearance at the board this morning. Very happy to give an opportunity to them to provide any further reflections, thoughts or comments that they might have.
I just wanted to say thanks for all the lovely feedback, to be honest. It was nice to have proper feedback like that, because we haven't been able to, obviously because of the youth summit regrettably being cancelled, it's been unfortunate we haven't been able to speak to many people recently. So it's just nice to have that kind of feedback, to be honest.
Thanks very much, Mohammed. It's a pleasure to have you here, as well as your fellow Youth Commissioners this morning. So thank you for taking the time to attend. It's much appreciated. I certainly share the disappointment around the need to Council the Youth Summit. I was very much looking forward to it. I know the Chief Constable was looking forward to it. I know members of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner and other police officers and members of the Violence Reduction Unit were really looking forward to attending the event with our youth commissioners and listening and hearing and meeting you in person. All being well, we will find a way to rearrange that youth summit. Because it's extremely important that, as far as possible, we make sure that that event can go ahead. I mean, listening to and having met our youth commissioners in the past, I have no doubt that you are leaders in your local communities. You have a platform as youth commissioners and a responsibility. But having met you, having listened to you, having heard you speak, I know full well that you are more than capable of rising to that challenge and meeting those responsibilities. So thank you so much. Our youth commissioners are elected by other young people and play a crucial role in being a voice for their peers on matters relating to crime and policing. And youth commissioners have been very helpful in the formation of my police and crime plan and will play a major role throughout my term of office. And I'm pleased that youth commissioners have decided to particularly focus on community policing, safer travel, and as we very powerfully heard this morning on the issue of reducing violence to women and girls, and the imperative that that is a top priority both for them and for myself within my police and crime plan. So thank you very much to all the youth commissioners who've taken time to attend this morning. It's been, as Tom said, really inspiring to hear and listen and meet you all. Thank you very much. So that then brings us to agenda item 8, which is reducing violence. There are 3 parts to this agenda item. I'm going to take each of the 3 contributions in turn, and once all 3 of those people who are presenting have completed their presentations, we'll then move to any questions, comments and discussions after that. We're asking that each of the presentations on this occasion under this agenda item are please kept to 5 minutes, on the assumption again that board members have all had an opportunity to read the papers, and it's available to members of the public to read. And that's with a view to maximising the opportunity for questions and discussions of the issues arising from the report. So we've got the first part of the agenda, which is agenda item A, and the first presentation is, I think the agenda suggested it was going to be by Assistant Chief Constable Richard Baker, but possibly Chief Superintendent Andrew Parsons was going to be presenting it. Not quite sure which of you is taking responsibility for that this morning.
It's Richard, Commissioner, and he's trying to go.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Assistant Chief Constable Richard Baker, please proceed with your presentation. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. So we know that serious youth violence is a wide-ranging challenge which affects individuals, families and communities. It comes in multiple forms and takes place within different contexts and situations, cuts across culture, race, socio-economic status. And we've seen that serious youth violence has had a growing profile over the last few years. Increases have been seen across most major cities, and West Midlands Police is seeing a rise in violence as well. This has a significant impact on the perception of people's fear of crime due to media reporting to some extent, because of what we see in essence is what our children being shot and stabbed. This paper outlined the context of the rise in violence. It details some of the impact around recent changes in crime reporting, and also it highlights some of the work we're doing to reduce violence, targeting the highest harm offenders, because there are some that are beyond help at the moment, frankly, and they need to be targeted relentlessly, but also ensuring that we do not criminalise all young offenders where there's a genuine and appropriate need, and to keep them out of the criminal justice system. So the government's focus on under 25 violence with injury includes a wide range of offences, and these include schools offences, robbery, serious and organised crime, violence involving urban street gangs, violence within the nighttime economies across the West Midlands area, county lines, violence against women and girls, etc., etc. And it is a multi-dimensional and complex problem. And the drivers of violence include things such as trauma and normalised behaviours, exclusion from education, poverty and inequality, poor and or absent parenting, and the list will go on and on. West Midlands Police were one of a number of forces to receive Home Office Serious Youth Violence funding to target under 25 violence with injury and knife crime. And the Home Office monitor 3 primary metrics under this fund. A reduction in hospital admissions for assaults with knife or sharp objects, especially with victims under 25. We're currently seeing a reduction of 16% in this area. To put that in perspective, that's 80 offences this year compared with 90 offences last year. The second metric is a reduction in knife-enabled serious violence with victims under 25. We're seeing an increase of 8.4% this year. The context in relation to that is this year we've got 361 offences compared with 333 last year. And the third metric is a reduction in all non-domestic homicides with victims under 25. When the paper was written, we were seeing a reduction of 55%. That's 4 homicides compared to 9 last year. Since the paper, I believe we've increased by 1. We've got up to 5 since then. And the West Midlands area is complex in terms of its diversity and vulnerability, as you'll be aware. We're first out of 39 police forces for deprivation. Wales measures deprivation differently, which is why there's 39 forces there. Second out of 42 in terms of unemployment, first out of 42 in terms of low educational attainment. We're first out of 42 police forces in terms of the proportion of young people that live within our area. And we're second out of 42 police forces in terms of diversity. So again, it highlights the kind of complexity of the area that we're policing and working with our partners in. Changes in crime data integrity, we know has had an impact on crime recording, and that's outlined in the paper. The majority of violent crime offending is at the less severe end of the spectrum. Section 47 assaults and stalking and harassment offences being the largest in volume that we see. A review of our crime data integrity has seen crime recording practices improve the number of crimes recorded. However, we are, as a result of this, seeing our crime recording increase by about 4%, which is approximately 280 offences per week. And these are offences which historically probably wouldn't have been recorded. So, for instance, if a member of the public reports somebody carrying a knife in the street, officers will turn up, do an area search. There won't be any evidence of anybody in the street carrying a knife. We previously wouldn't have recorded that, but now we have to record that as an offence of possession of a weapon, which is a violent crime under the current crime recording. So we are cognizant of the impact that has had. Year to date, our positive outcome rate for under 25 violence sits at 6.1%. Compared to 2021, it was 8.6%, and 1920 it was 9.77%. However, we are making some real improvements, I think, in that. And in November, our outcome rate was 9.4%. So we're picking up the learning and applying that across all the different areas within Force CID and our neighbourhood policing units to get that level back up to where it should be. There's a number of focused operations discussed in the paper, targeting organised crime groups and urban street gangs in Birmingham and Coventry in particular. And these have shown some real success. And Operation Fresco and Operation Torcular are discussed in more detail within the paper. As you'll appreciate, Force CID continue to see high levels of attrition, with victims disengaging from investigations where serious youth violence is the primary offence. All serious violence involving under 25s are prioritised on a daily basis for immediate victim engagement, because we know that this gives us the best opportunity to come to a positive outcome as quickly as possible. A number of initiatives and pilots are also being conducted across MPUs and across Force CID primarily to increase positive outcomes. And this is not just in relation to the kind of relentless pursuit of our highest harm offenders, but where we can look at dealing with offenders in a different way so that we don't criminalise them. This is always done in consultation with the victim and with their consent. And is also carefully monitored. So a number of examples across the different areas include the checkpoint pilot, which is deferred prosecution for young offenders, generally 10 to 17 years old, who commit offences of carrying a bladed article or a knife. We've got the Outcome 22 pilot, where the offender must meaningfully engage in diversionary, educational or intervention activity, and if they don't, then we can continue with a criminal justice outcome. We work very closely with St Giles, Youth Offending Service and Remedy, primarily in relation to those. We have a model in Solihull where we have PCSOs working alongside Force CID, focusing on impact areas primarily, looking at out-of-court disposals and how we can uplift the outcome rate for those in impact areas for violent crime, but also diverting first-time offenders under 18 years of age away from the criminal justice system. Birmingham East runs a similar scheme for robberies, looking at community resolutions for first-time offenders for people aged 10 to 14 years of age. And I've mentioned already the kind of Operation Fresco approach of tiering our offenders from Tier 1, which is our highest harm offenders, down to Tier 6, which are offenders that are very much on the periphery of gang activity, that are managed and diverted by our neighbourhood officers and our offender management teams. The work we do with the Violence Reduction Unit is integral to our approach to reducing violence across West Midlands Police. We invest in a Chief Inspector and 2 inspectors into the BRU to support the delivery and integration of that particular programme. And the effective partnership between the two is absolutely critical for short, medium and long-term violent crime reduction. The VRU do attend on a daily basis force and local threat meetings, local tasking boards, and they are a member of our Strategic Violence Board and the Local Police and Governance Board as well. So they are well embedded in terms of their support to West Midlands Police. And there are some great examples, which I'm sure Claire will touch upon, of the work that we do with the BRU. Over in Walsall, some of the work we've done around consequent management meetings, the work that they've done around school exclusions, adopting a broader public health approach to reducing violence, briefings around the serious violence duty, work in terms of county lines and management of missing from home people, trauma-informed training and the Step Together programme, and just a number of the many examples that I could give in terms of the work that we do with the BRU. Project Guardian is our dedicated resource to combating serious youth violence. We've received a grant of £3.4 million in 2021, which was match funded up to 20% by West Midlands Police, that's £588,000. And this part funds a superintendent, a chief superintendent, plus a task force of an inspector, 3 sergeants and 22 constables. And these perform dedicated patrols in serious violence hotspot locations. They conduct community engagement, enhanced stop and search operations. And the other thing we noticed with this team is they're upskilling local neighbourhood officers in this area as well, which has been a huge positive for us. The force ambition is to implement a 10-year violence prevention strategy, which reflects the complexity surrounding the drivers of violence and also demonstrates the commitment that we have to tackling youth violence with our community and partners over the longer term. You'll be aware of the serious violence duty that is currently being consulted on. In preparation for this, I've already mentioned the violence board that I chair. Membership of the board includes the BRU, serious organised crime leads, heads of intelligence, Guardian, nighttime economy lead, local policing and investigations, as well as some other representatives. So we feel we are in a really good place in terms of preparing for the serious violence duty landing and briefing our critical partners in relation to their obligation to meet the serious violence duty. Under 25 violence, again, as outlined in the paper, is absolutely a tactical priority for West Midlands Police. It's reviewed on a monthly basis at our Force Tasking Delivery Board, where decisions are made on where to invest, not just the Guardian Task Force, but other resources across West Midlands Police to help reduce serious youth violence. The work we do in schools, again, is critical. I touched upon it with on the last paper around community policing, but the work that the VRU do through their education intervention advisors, alongside our own local neighbourhood policing unit, is absolutely critical. And again, there's some great examples in Sandwell, where we have dedicated schools officers. We have the Birmingham Virtual Reality Programme, which is outlined within the paper, using virtual reality tools, where we go out to young people and they experience a simulated true-to-life scenario covering the themes of peer pressure, gang culture, antisocial behaviour and youth violence as well, which has also gone down really, really well. So in essence, hopefully the paper outlines some of the work that we are doing ourselves and alongside the VRU. We continue to be absolutely committed to reducing serious youth violence, targeting the most serious high harm offenders, whilst, as I've kind of outlined, diverting first time offenders away from the criminal justice system and divert them into alternative pathways so they don't go on to re-offend again in the future. We've done a huge amount over the last few years, and I think we've seen some great examples of some really innovative work. I think the next step is around how we can standardise and provide some consistency across some of our teams, applying what we know works more rigorously across some of our violent crime hotspots, beyond just our impact areas, whilst also continuing to push innovation and creativity to make sure we continue to reduce serious youth violence. So that's a kind of very brief outline of the paper. I'm happy to take any questions, obviously, Commissioner. I'm sure there'll be several.
Thanks ever so much, Assistant Chief Constable. We'll take agenda item 8B now. And I know that this item is to be presented by Claire Gollop, who is, of course, our Director of the Violence Reduction Unit in the West Midlands. But in addition to Claire, we also have Evan Jones from St Giles Trust, and he is the Head of Child Criminal Exploitation Development for St Giles Trust. So perhaps, Claire, you can lead off, and then Evan can follow on your footsteps, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, Commissioner, and thank you for the opportunity. I think we would agree that the landscape that's been outlined by Rich in terms of the level and the type of violence that's affecting our young people isn't tolerable, and it should cause leaders across a range of organisations to be concerned. I think it clearly does, and we have seen the Violence Reduction Partnership grow and the unit that supports that partnership to evolve noticeably during our second year of operation. The partnership faces challenges balancing support for those who've already got caught up in cycles of violence and exploitation to help them find that off-ramp away from harm, trying to reduce the transmission of trauma and the many impacts of violence that has occurred, and investing in the earliest possible preventative activity, which arguably few others are currently mandated to do with quite such as much focus as the VRU. The partnership has taken the position that we need to deliver on all three areas. So one of the most noticeable changes this year is that the VRU has improved its offer in the immediate aftermath of violent incidents. We do this work primarily through partners. We enable them and we hopefully prompt them as well to deliver well. We unlock additional support and we help all agencies and communities to share and communicate their understanding of risks and concerns. And we've deployed an increasingly sophisticated response like this more days than we haven't in the last 6 months, which is perhaps indicative of the scale of the challenge. The systems that support children and communities at risk of violence between or affecting young people are becoming, I believe, more interconnected as a result of the partners' conscious efforts to work together in a more cohesive way, the VRU sometimes being the glue that enables this to happen. We're now delivering more action through cross-agency forums. We share training and workforce development. Data and information from partners and from the community informs each other's activity now. And we are looking across the partnership for consistency for our children and those that support them. That's not to encourage complacency, for it is obvious that significant investment across a really wide range of sectors.
Okay, we appear to.
It's also the case that whilst there's a greater alignment of resources now and there is more coordination of existing spend, the level of investment that local partners ring-fence for preventative activity is relatively difficult to establish, and quite a lot of prevention initiatives are delivered solely through central government grants. And this leads to a patchwork of precarious funding. It introduces funders' demands into an already complicated situation. But above all, it risks introducing pilot after pilot into communities that have experienced now generations of short-term interventions. We are, as a partnership, delivering some specific interventions ourselves, and through those we reached over 3,000 young people in the first 6 months of the year. And half of that time we were running on skeleton funding due to the gap between grants. So I'm very confident that our Q3 returns will see that number rise, not least because in year we've secured an additional 3.6 million of funding to deliver an increase in our reachable moments, mental health support, trauma-informed activity, and we're also hosting the national pilot for the Step Together programme, which now sees over 100 additional youth workers on our streets every school day to support young people's journeys to and from school. But behind every one of those 3,000 children that we reach, we're encountering them in incredibly difficult, frightening, dangerous and chaotic circumstances. And I'm so proud of our delivery partners who introduce to those children a point of stability, who build trust, who assist those young people as they work to navigate some very difficult environments that any one of us would find challenging. And each person that we count in those numbers as supported through our projects represents actually a series of encounters, sometimes with intensity, often with that gradual graining of trust. So the process of support here is far from linear, and the people that we work with will often be with us dropping in and out of service support for some time. I think we should just take a moment to celebrate those young people who do outgrow us, whose trajectory is nudged in a slightly adjusted direction and who go on and do incredible things. And amongst the many griefs that violence that affects young people generates for us at a society-wide level, we absolutely need all of these children in our future. The same ones that are caught up in these difficult circumstances, they're plucky, they're innovative, they're problem solvers, they're dynamic, they're resilient, and we want them using those skills for the greater good. And we see that absolutely crystallised in the journey of so many people with lived experience in their roles as community leaders, as activists for change, and of course as peer mentors. And we have examples of that within all of our delivery partners and indeed in our core team as well. I was just asked to expand on one item, one element of the work we were doing with the force and the ambition that we share with West Midlands Police to become a leading police service in relation to adopting trauma-informed practice. These are easy words to say and very hard words to achieve. We recognise that, I think all of us. Policing is inevitably involved in trauma-inducing circumstances. Many who join the service will do so holding their own trauma, and it accumulates through their work. And we know that unresolved trauma changes the way that you see and recognise vulnerability in others. And we also know that from studies such as the punishing abuse study, that many who the police encounter and who enter the criminal justice system will be holding trauma themselves. And the science says that that will affect the way that they interact with policing processes, and that may then further compound their situation. So we've been running for the past 2 years a series of trauma-informed training that's been delivered in a range of settings. But for our trauma-informed policing programme, we wanted to adapt this specifically to the context of policing and embed the trainers within the force. So the content was co-developed. It landed better because examples were very relevant, and the training was accompanied by a steering group that helped embed process change and was clearly endorsed as a way of working by the organisation rather than just a course to go on. So we've been able to embed a team of 5 trainers from Barnardo's. We're making good progress with the development of role-specific training set out in the paper across a range of different functions. I'm happy to expand on that more in questions if that's appropriate. So just in closing, I do believe that the VIU partnership is demonstratively thinking across systems, caring about people and delivering across both our grant mandated and our locally agreed objectives. In the main, we are well positioned to continue to access future funding, though I do draw your attention to the risks of the coming quarter. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thanks very much, Claire, for that presentation. Perhaps we can move straight to Evan Jones from St Giles Trust. Evan.
Thank you, Commissioner, for the opportunity to speak here, and thanks, Claire, for covering so much in your presentation. I couldn't agree more about what you say about the value of the young people we work with. They are entrepreneurs, they are bright, responsive, resilient, and if they can be steered in the right direction, we have some fantastic individuals there. In terms of my role, I work across England and Wales on child criminal exploitation, setting up projects, developing, negotiating, working with police and crime commissioners, violence reduction units, local authorities. So I have quite a wide view of what's going on out there. In terms of background, I helped set up St Giles's first gangs project back in 2006, and then our first county line services in 2016. So what we're always trying to do is be at the front of innovation around these issues, spot the emerging problems, spot the gaps, and bring lived experience to bear on those issues. That's our key thing at St Giles, is to bring people with lived experience, our peer mentors, who are going to get better engagement from those really difficult to reach young people. In terms of the West Midlands, we started in the West Midlands under that transforming rehabilitation funding stream when probation was semi-privatised and we were working in the prisons. And it was actually a fantastic piece of work for us because we were training longer sentence prisoners across most of the West Midlands prisons using our level 3 in advice and guidance, training them to be our peer mentors, our next generation of caseworkers. And then by fantastic good timing, county lines raised the issue of youth violence up the agenda, the VIUs were developed, and it meant that we had a workforce ready to go into a lot of these roles. So a lot of the work that's been commissioned by the VIU in the West Midlands has been staffed by people we trained in West Midlands prisons some years ago under a totally different funding stream. So for us, it's really come together in the area, and it's been a pleasure working with the VIU because we've seen VIUs across the country. Some struggle for an identity distinct from a PCC's office. Some are just commissioning bodies, others lead strategically. And I think what we've got in the West Midlands is some strategic leadership that's actually trying to join the dots, because the dots are many, varied and complex. Previous speakers mentioned domestic abuse. We see such a crossover between exposure to domestic abuse and involvement in youth violence, either as a victim or a perpetrator. We're not doing anything about that. Well, I'm not aware that we are. It's something we could really get in early on, because I've looked at the backgrounds of so many youngsters involved in serious violence, and they were exposed to that type of violence when they were young. There's so many opportunities like that, but you do need a strategic body to draw it in. In terms of the work we do supported by the VIU, it's been listed in the paperwork that's gone out. Key points about it are we're working at reachable moments, trying to maximise engagement by being there at the right place and the right time, whether it's a custody suite, a hospital, at the point of arrest, or when youngsters have gone missing and been arrested by another police force out of area. So we're trying to capitalise on the right moment to get young people to engage. And we're also trying to put the right workers in front of them, the workers, the peer mentors with the credibility, the cultural competence, the understanding, who will get them to engage. Because we don't think we're the only answer, we think we're part of the picture. And what we're trying to do is get the lived experience workers into the overall multi-agency response to youth violence, working alongside YOS, probation, children's services, police, and all the other agencies. And Claire touched on the issues around funding. It is hairy for us. We do take advantage of short-term funding streams in the West Midlands and elsewhere. It's a great way of setting something up. It's a great way of proving a concept, but it does leave us with a bit of a worrying time at this time of year, because particularly the money that comes down from central government tends to not be approved until quite late in the day. And the risk we run is that we're going to have to stop taking referrals around January, February, and move youngsters onto other services if we can find them. And then, as often happens, the money does come through. And by that point, we've lost half our staff because they've sought other jobs, and we have to effectively restart the programme. So it is a problem. I mean, West Midlands has done quite well on this in that our staff have stuck with us despite what it says on their contracts, which is brilliant of them. In Merseyside, we had a very different experience. 3/4 of the team left at the end of the last funding period from some Home Office funding, and we basically had to start again, which, considering the seriousness of what we're working with, the fact that it's threats to life, it's really high risk stuff. It seems a shame to be operating like that. We're prepared to take the risk of doing it because we think it's worth it to establish these services, but we do need more security and stability longer term for these services to really embed in the sort of multi-agency response across the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Evan. So, do we have any comments or questions arising out of those three presentations for any or all three of those people who presented? Yes, Tom.
Thanks very much, Commissioner. The first point is kind of a bit of a comment, really, in terms of an opportunity for further collaboration. I mean, so much of what the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office commissions goes to trying to tackle actually some of the causes of violence. Now, it's going to try and tackle the causes of other crime as well, but as kind of you just alluded to, Evan, they often overlap. So, for example, the PCC funds things around family drugs and alcohol courts, it supports other early help initiatives, funds restorative justice, public health approach to drug diversion, so that's both around trying to prevent young people from being exploited into violent crime or being caught up into addiction, or parents who might have addiction in the home and how that can relate to violence later on. And of course, a huge amount of work around domestic abuse and violence against women and girls, both from policy side and also Nikki Brennan as Victims Commissioner, and some of that's around perpetrator work. And then finally, other kind of holistic diversion for vulnerable women in the New Chance programme. Again, sometimes their parents and some of the complications in the home can kind of lead to violence. So in outlining some of that work, and that isn't all of it, it's just, again, to restate our deep commitment to collaborating with the partners of the VRU around joining up some of the stuff that we're doing, because there's even more join up there to kind of tackle violence and other crimes that have some of the same genesis. But anyway, that's my rant over. I thought kind of a couple of questions, and I know there'll be some good answers to that. I should just say, clearly there's some fantastic work going on with the Violence Reduction Unit. So this is about just kind of bringing some of that open rather than anything else. So the first question, and I don't mind who answers it, it might be WMP, it might be Evan, it might be Claire. Suppose, could you elaborate just to bring to life some of the specific kind of work that we think we need to see more of, or that's already happening, to prevent school exclusions and the role that might play in some young people's vulnerability in violent crime?
I'm happy to start on this one briefly. We do some schools work as part of our funding from the VRU. What we've developed in some areas is a more in-depth approach where we actually embed a worker across a group of schools. So you might have a single worker who works in a couple of secondaries, a PRU, and a couple of feeder primaries. So they get to know the discipline teachers, the SENCOs, all the key individuals in the school. And as well as delivering those group sessions around knife crime, gang involvement, which are very valuable, they're also there to pick up the fallout of those sessions. Because if those sessions are effective, somebody's going to come up at the end of them and say, oh, actually, my brother's got a gun under the bed. This did happen to us once, actually. We got onto the police very quickly. But you have a worker embedded in the schools who can then give one-to-one support to those children who are on the edge of exclusion. And that can be really valuable because you've got somebody, again, with that cultural competence, credibility, who can sit down with a kid and a teacher and actually draw up a contract about not throwing chairs anymore, or whatever it is that's getting them into real difficulties and pushing them on the edge of exclusion. So that's what I'd support, but there's also lots of other approaches as well.
Thank you, Evan. Was there any other further point you wanted to make, Tom? Oh, yeah, sorry, Claire, come in. Yes, sorry.
Sorry, Commissioner. I just wondered if I could just expand on a couple of areas, and there are so many things that we would like to see done differently in relation to education and the way in which young people are able to stay in and access education that feels pertinent and relevant to them and that they engage within. So I'll just pick a handful of them, and I'm happy to expand even further if required. But you know, at a policy level, and I'm thinking here national policy level, that Scotland gets this right, I think. In Scotland, you have to prove that you've tried to keep the kid in school and you've tried to help find the ways, and you've provided services and support that enables them to stay in education prior to exclusion. And here we have it the other way around. You know, we prove the adverse behaviour rather than that. So I think there is definitely something to think about at a national level. In relation to the local level, just building on Evan's point there, we're working really closely with a lot of schools across the West Midlands through our education intervention advisors to develop trauma-informed schools. And I think schools and individuals within schools recognising behaviour that may present as challenging behaviour in that situation as a reaction to the circumstances they find themselves within is really important. So we're pleased to see the rollout of that in a number of schools, and we'd like to extend that even further. And adding that well-being and welfare support on the back of that is really important. So this year we've been able to unlock extra support for mental health support, largely taking on referrals from schools. We're delivering CBT to 200 extra young people across the West Midlands through the HEAL Hub. That's picking up on delays that we were understanding were happening of some 200 weeks for referrals of medium risk mental health support. That's a very long time in a child's life. It is arguably most of a child's life. So we need to make sure that those additional support structures around the schools are there to pick up and work within this space. And then just one one request, I guess, or suggestion at a tactical level for West Midlands Police. The communication between police and schools is incredibly important. That's well recognised in relation to domestic abuse, and you've championed the rollout of Operation Encompass across the region now. But police being in touch with schools when they believe that kids have been exposed to something that will cause their behaviour to be different the next day at school is incredibly important. And so when we find children through our policing activity, be that proactive warrants or other activity, it's really important that we find a way to make sure that the school knows what's appropriate to know and treats the child well when they turn up for school the next day. There's more, but I realise we have not enough time to go into it.
Thank you for that, Claire. That's appreciated. Tom, did you want to make any further response to that before I move on to Kath and then Jonathan Jardine?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Commissioner, just you've already kind of touched upon this helpfully. Is there more that we would like to see from child mental health services in, you know, whether it's CAMS getting involved in, you know, earlier opportunities, or whether more their kind of resource perhaps dedicated, which might potentially be even more relevant with some of the, you know, inflationary and budget pressures that are down the road and potentially reduced government funding for the VRU. Is there more you think could come from that particular kind of partnership?
I could just give a quick initial response on what I'm seeing across the country, which is a number of initiatives focusing on this particular group of young people, because not only are the services not readily available, the waiting lists are long, but the youngsters resist the services as well. They don't, I mean, lots of people reject the label of mental health, but these youngsters particularly reject it. And we're not talking about diagnoses like schizophrenia or bipolar. We're talking about trauma and stress related things, spectrum disorders like ADHD and so on. So hard to diagnose, possibly below the statutory threshold. So what I've seen in a few areas is some really good work where you've got a combination of voluntary sector staff and clinical staff working together.
Thank you very much, Evan. I think we missed you for about 5 seconds at the end of that response.
Sorry,
but I think we got the gist of what you were communicating to us. So thank you for that. Perhaps can move now to Kath Hannon and then on to Jonathan Jardine, please.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is for Richard, and then one for Claire. Richard, during the course of talking about diversions and finding other pathways for young people other than into the criminal justice system, You touched on the fact of communicating with victims and, you know, indicated there was a very positive response to what was proposed by the police. What happens then where a victim doesn't agree with how the police will make that disposal, and what right of influence have they got now, or how can they influence that decision making? Because one of the areas for improvement, which is in the report, is about updating victims when a suspect's been arrested, there's been a voluntary interview, or they've been bailed. So clearly there's some decision making going on which hasn't been shared with the victim.
Yeah, thanks, Kath. So no, you're right to pull that out. So, you know, we'll always look to work with the victim where we can and get their consent, because clearly that is the best way forward for victim and suspect. But where we don't get that victim consent, you know, ultimately it would still come down to kind of police decision making. CPS may be involved depending on the kind of outcome that we're looking at, obviously. But ultimately, if it's a first-time young offender and we think that diverting that individual away from the criminal justice system is still the right thing to do, we can and we will still make that decision, and clearly have to work alongside the victim in terms of how we explain that and the rationale around it. Some of the schemes that we do see, again, you'll be aware of, and there's some of it's outlined in the paper, are incredibly successful if we get this right in terms of reducing further offending. So we've seen some of our schemes reduce reoffending significantly. 80+% of the people that we've dealt with over the last 12, 18 months have not gone on to reoffend again since that. So we know it is the right thing to do, but without victim consent, we'll still ultimately look at that as an alternative pathway if we think it's the right thing.
I'm completely supportive of the diversions and the other pathways. What concerns me, and quite improper for first-time offenders for that consideration to be given, but there's going to be an area somewhere in the middle of all of this where you're going to have some very unhappy victims. Now, there's a right of review which is focused on CPS decision making, but I don't think that's the case for any police decision making. So it's really important that, as unhappy as victims are, you know, that effort is put into and understand why the decisions are being made, and ultimately it's about protecting people in the future as well as within the current day. So it's just some reassurance about the time and effort that's put into helping those victims understand the police decision making.
Yeah, no,
thanks.
Sorry, Commissioner. So
go ahead.
Absolutely right, Kath, to raise that. And you know, again, I'm not aware of any particular instances where the victim has kind of pushed back. But you're right. You know, it's something that I can go away and probably have a bit of a deeper look at to make sure that we're getting that right. Okay,
thank you very much, Richard. Claire, this question is for yourself. You know, trauma-informed practice is very current at the moment, and I know there's lots of training, and I've been subject of it myself, as have other police officers. But can you give any insight into what changes you've seen in police service delivery since officers and other staff have had that training?
Thanks very much, Kath. And you're right, it is very it is a subject that is much talked about, I think, at the moment, though not yet found in hardly any curriculum about either onboarding new police officers or different roles that have specific national curriculums around them where training occurs. So it's a conversation that I'm having regularly at the moment with the College of Policing, with various NPCC leads and others, as to what do we mean by this when it sits within policing, and how do we make it pertinent. In relation to the changes that we've seen, you know, we began this service delivery of the police specific trauma informed training just sort of about 6 or 7 weeks ago. So it's quite early to see the changes now, but that training didn't come out of nowhere for those officers that took part in that training. So I do have a small amount of positive news to give you already, if that makes sense, but I just wanted to set it in the context of the fact that it's very recent and is ongoing. And the benefit here has been, because we didn't, together with West Midlands Police, we didn't commission an external trainer to just drop in and do some sessions that we encouraged officers to go to. We embedded the trainers within the service to develop the training. That was a journey that people began going on prior to coming into the training session, if that makes sense. So there's been a focus group running, I would say probably for about 5 or 6 months now, in custody, which is the area where we began this training. And that focus group has brought together interested parties from across that department, other bits of the force that work with that department too, but also interested parties from outside, so representatives for the appropriate adults, for example, for the healthcare provision that is within the custody centres, for YOS, for probation, etc. And indeed, even children's services are involved in that. So there is a multi-agency group looking at what happens in our custody practices, and of course, so much of that is policy and is, you know, it is standard routine, needs to be done in the same way every time, etc. And we weren't sure how much of a difference the conversations about practice and policy would actually make there. But what we've seen is, first, the custody staff get really behind exploring what the literature means, what the evidence base means, and helping to develop the training for their peers to then take, thinking about what that means and how it's applied to the custody situation. We embedded the Barnardo's trainers for a number of shifts within custody. They watched, they observed, they saw what happened, they asked questions afterwards. Some of those questions have prompted change already. So just for example, you know, you do these processes so regularly, you forget that it's going to be triggering to take someone's hand and put them on the live scanner without warning them that you're going to do that. And having someone from the outside remind you that might be why they reacted the way you did when you took their hand has been quite helpful. We've also seen the trainers spend time in a number of other policing settings. And the training feedback we've got so far when we rolled that training out, it has been really positive. People have said this is training that helps us understand behaviour that we witness and see every day at work, and we'll now start to think about it differently. And we've also been able to unlock some of that investment that has meant that steering group has been able to take some environmental changes within the custody space. So thinking about murals on the walls to make the place seem lighter. A number of the young people that were contributed to the research, people who've been through the custody centres in the West Midlands, were able to share what they thought would make the environment less trauma-inducing from them through research and support that was delivered through charities. They highlighted that the lack of access to time when you're in custody, not understanding how the time is passing, is really stressful for them. And so we're making available now some tough clocks that people can access if they want to, and distraction packs and things like that. So there's some practical changes beginning to be seen, and we'll be watching really carefully to see how this works as we work through other police functions and how this becomes properly embedded in training. Rich, I've probably stolen all of your thunder, but I don't know if you want to give any other observations there.
Thanks, Claire. I think you've covered most of it. So I think, you know, the trauma-informed training we've got booked in, hopefully by the end of March, to get in total about 3,000 officers trained. When you look at the raw numbers, it's going to be a challenge, but we are going to absolutely work very closely with the VRU to make sure that we get as close to that as we can. So no, I fully support what Claire said there. I think this is absolutely the way to go, and we're on an upward trajectory in terms of the amount of training that we're delivering across all areas of policing.
Thanks very much. Jonathan, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. Just a couple of observations, and then a question that I think is for Claire and for Evan, really. The points about funding, I know we have touched on that and the impact of it. I would absolutely echo the points that Evan has made there. From the perspective of the OPCC, we can offer, because we're sort of part of a much larger organisation, are able to offer a degree of bridging funding to try and smooth out the bumps between the allocation of funding, but that is limited to only those activities that are commissioned through the OPCC, where there is funding that comes direct from others. to other organisations, our ability to offer that kind of support is much more limited, and that I think is such a critical part of trying to get that both continuity of service that makes it more effective, but also build those working relationships with partners and with the public and communities, all of which has been touched on. It's such a key issue. I really would amplify again also the point that Tom has made about the strategic leadership and kind of bringing this together. I would suggest that a key challenge for us in 2022, both the calendar year and critically the financial year, is around the breadth of thematic activity, the sheer number of thematic areas that are becoming a priority, and looking for the opportunities to join them together, whether that's youth violence, domestic abuse, and RASO, drug harm reduction, criminal justice sector diversionary activity, early help and intervention. That is our kind of strategic challenge, I suppose, one of our big strategic challenges in the year ahead. The question I would chip in is from the reports, one of the issues that stands out is, we as a partnership, as the OPCC and Force and others, as all parts of these large and complex partnerships, we've not yet landed the ability to secure funding and resources, mainstream funding and resources from other members of that local partnership. So and clearly this is key. In the sense it both creates sustainability, it's important to the effectiveness of the work because it's more embedded in the activity of other partners, and it's key to scale as well. What can we be doing better, Evan? Claire, what's the approaches that we need to be taking to secure that sort of partner literal buy-in that we're after?
I'll make a couple of comments and hand over to Claire. I mean, a key one for me, it's hard. We try and do things for the right reasons, but money is important. And if we can demonstrate a cost benefit, a cost saving as a result of investment, I think we've got a better chance. I mean, a key one for me in this is the growth of what I've called edge of care projects, where children's services are actually directly investing in services to keep children out of care. Because they make a direct cash saving when a child doesn't go into care. And we know that this whole area of cost benefit, there's real cashable benefits, and there's others that are a bit more nebulous. If someone doesn't go to prison, it's a great thing, but nobody writes you a check for the work you've done. Whereas if a youngster doesn't go into a children's home, that's a huge cash saving. So that would be one of my targets, and I've achieved this with some local authority areas, but we've got them to buy into the idea of the type of work we've been doing funded by the VRU under these short-term funding streams to actually make that a bit more embedded and to come out of their mainstream funding allocation.
Thanks, Evan. Did you want to come in, Claire? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, Commissioner. So, I mean, I think there are things that we need to do in terms of making sure that everybody feels and believes that the projects that we're talking about belong to them from the very beginning. And it kind of goes right back to the sort of application of funding and grant stage of working up that plan and letting partners into that planning process, rather than developing something and then trying to hand it over to them afterwards. And I don't think that we take the latter approach, but I think we need to make sure that even when grant applications come out with such quick, tight turnarounds, we're talking to the right people in the right organisations for them to have this on their radar, that it's something that may be mainstreamable in the near future. I'm not sure that at the moment we clearly set that out enough for any senior leaders in other organisations to really receive the message that there's going to be an ask for this to come from your budget in the next 18 months, 2 years, 3 years time. So I think a longer term sort of projection that we kind of make, that we share with partners, is quite important, because unfortunately our partners many of them are subject to the same types of funding constraints and cycles as we are. Most of them are public sector bodies. And some have very different financial cycles than our own. So getting in early enough with that information is really important, and promoting a sense of joint ownership all the way through. I think to extend on Evan's point around cost benefit analysis, I think there will be some numbers coming out soon from the national VIU evaluation that indicate the return on a pound in general for work that's spent on prevention through the violence reduction network. I think we have commissioned a number of evaluations, and we are participating in a lot of evaluations that are commissioned by others about us. And the challenge we've got really is those evaluations are going to show us what it's like to operate in a pandemic context. So there is something about working across the whole of the VIU network nationally, pooling what we know about evaluation and being prepared to accept some of that evaluation findings from elsewhere and seek to see how they might apply in our setting. That is quite important to do. So thinking both wider, as a critical role, I think, for a public figurehead such as the Commissioner as a partner in the organisation is really in taking that voice into government for us, because if we continue to present this as primarily a policing matter, and the VIUs are funded through the Home Office, so there is always a danger that occurs at a national level. We undersell the benefits to other organisations, the cost benefits, the demand benefits, etc. And I would really like to see stronger information coming out from central government departments in health, in MOJ, in DCLG about the cost benefit for their savings that they could be getting through working in this way. And I think more encouragement downwards to adopt and work in this way. And we have started to see that. To give credit where it is due to the Department for Education, now has a serious violence national unit, and they are pushing information out about the way that the education sector could work more strongly in this space and could invest in this space jointly.
Thanks very much, Claire. I think Assistant Chief Constable, or I'm assuming it's you, Assistant Chief Constable, you wanted to come in with a final comment or observation on this, please.
Yeah, no, it's myself, Commissioner. I mean, I think this is the kind of, I think this is the big question that Jonathan was asked. And you know what's really interesting on the debate we've had today, there've been far more questions around the partnership that policing is part of rather than the police on this issue. And I think this is, that I think represents a very good direction of travel that's going on in our group. And I think as Claire has identified, it needs to carry on because it is much wider. I think I'm going to agree with a lot of what colleagues have said, but I think the serious violence duty, we have pushed very hard to ensure it describes in more detail the role of partners. If it just becomes you've all got to do something around serious violence to help the police, which is the way it can be seen if we're not careful, partners aren't clear enough about what their part of the system is that they should do. And so using the serious violence duty to be very clear, not just locally, but I think increasingly encouraged nationally to frame and be clear what is expected of other statutory partners, what things they should do. And what I describe is what is the optimum operating model in a place that agencies should see that demonstrates a good system for reducing violence, I think is important. I think we must exploit the serious violence duty. If we can't influence the broader government piece, we must describe the operating model at place level here in the West Midlands, because I think that's so key. It's key because the systems are changing around us. So, public health has been a key player in the region, off to being the Health Protection Agency and various other bodies. CCG is disappearing into integrated care systems. So the landscape's changing all the time, and nailing that down is really important. Because I think the challenge we always see with these issues is we have a heartful response at moments of tragedy. We can chart them in the region all the way from Charlene Ellis and Letitia Shakespeare all the way through to Kean Lincoln. That there are seismic moments that people, I've stopped talking about tipping point moments because we've had far too many where we should have tipped by now. But these moments come along that generate a kind of heart-based response. And actually, we've got to kind of see more logic and a head-based response, I think, from agencies that this is the right thing to do. It is the best way of spending public money. It delivers better outcomes to be integrated. And so very much my commitment is to work with you, Commissioner, to try and support, I think, as we go into this next year, that step up. We talk often in police about leadership. With the VRU, we talk a lot about fellowship. that we are very committed partner as one part of the VRU. We are the only partners to staff at our cost to VRU. We don't expect to hand out for it. And we need to get to a position where the region really sees owning the operating model that VRU is developing at county and at place-based level is going to be the right answer to tackle what is a very complicated problem, I think, that we face.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. In view of time, we will need to move on. However, thank you so much, Assistant Chief Constable Richard Baker, Claire Gollop and Evan Jones for your presentations and for taking our questions and adding your further thoughts and comments. That's all much appreciated. Ongoing issues remain from the government, still not having confirmed funding for the Violence Reduction Unit to continue next year. We're hopeful that it will be confirmed and that there will finally be a multi-year settlement. But to reduce the risk of staff attrition, I've underwritten the core staffing costs of the unit until July 2022. And in addition, as co-convener of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners National Serious Violence Portfolio, I'm writing to the Policing Minister to request that firstly, violence reduction units receive confirmation of funding by 31st of December 2021, and secondly, that they do receive a multi-year funding settlement. And nevertheless, around 3,000 young people were supported in the first half of this financial year, including nearly 400 young people who've been supported to get away from violence after being supported by youth workers hosted in the region's A&E departments. So that takes us to agenda item 9, which is the Chief Constable update. This, of course, is to be presented by the Chief Constable, and it's an update on operational policing matters that can be discussed in the public domain. Chief Constable.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I'm probably going to touch broadly on 4 areas I think that are relevant. First, I'd echo the points you made about Arthur, Lavina and Hughes. Clearly now is not the time to make a statement around that. We are very engaged on the national review into Arthur's life and the role policing played within that with other statutory agencies, and of course very engaged in the joint thematic area inspection that's taking place in Solihull. I think not just Arthur's case, sadly we've seen many other cases in the last few weeks that actually protecting our children is absolutely the forefront of all statutory agencies, and we will engage intensively with that work that's being carried out at the moment. In terms of other areas that I just want to pick up, I think we are very conscious that we are still going through the level of turbulence around the pandemic and the role the police plays within that. So it's just really to set the tone, I think, around the COVID response that I talked about earlier. We are, I think, doing a number of things at the moment. The first is to make sure that West Midlands Police is resilient as we can be. Our own staff face the health challenges that are also seen in broader society. And so the force has returned to a hybrid working model, much more, where more of our staff are asked to be working at home at the moment. We are carefully monitoring the arrangements in the force around our own environment to make sure we're as COVID secure as we can be, so that we maintain good resilience across our services so that we can be there for the public when the public needs us. In terms of the response we got, and I think this is particularly relevant in terms of the comments I made about Arthur, is that, of course, one of the graphic issues that's been worked to resolve is that as people return into homes, as potentially schools go away, as people potentially drop out of the site of agencies, we have made sure that there is a renewed vigour to make sure that with our partners, the surveillance of our most vulnerable in society is kept firmly on the agenda, so that actually partners are still working tightly and effectively, and certainly from our perspective, making sure our safeguarding people are very much supported and resilient in work during this critical time as we may face additional restrictions. The third area I just wanted to talk about was obviously some of the work that did get some coverage last week, but is the work we do around hate crime. So one of the things that we have seen, I think, through the pandemic is a greater willingness of people to voice issues where they are subject to hateful behaviour. And I did just want to draw out, I think, once again, the pioneering work of PC Stuart Ward, who's the Force's hate crime officer. For those who follow us on social media, you'll see that Sky Sports ran a documentary on Stuart's work. I think it's a very graphic demonstration of the impact hateful behaviour has on people, and in this case around racist behaviour. But you will have also seen, I think, the considerable work we've been putting in place with our LGBTQ communities in Birmingham city centre, who've also felt that at times over the last few months, the impact on them from violent and hateful behaviour has intimidated themselves from using the city centre. And again, lots of brilliant work in that place. I always remind the public it's very important to come forward and tell us. We take hate crime very seriously. We take third-party reports. We take reports from True Vision. Many areas where people can reach out to us if they are subject to hateful behaviour. And I hope the documentary around Stuart will give confidence that the force is a leader on this work, as is UK policing, not just in football, but in hate crime in general. And the final thing I just wanted to talk about, I think at the last meeting we were able to talk in much depth about the force's recent field inspection. And I just think there are a few things worth calling out. I think the field inspection is, a helpful area of inspection and review for the force, and paints a narrative around the work the force is doing. I think there's some really positive areas drawn out of good practice around West Midlands Police. I think the areas that are just worth noting and just touching on in terms of the response the force will be taking. So it clearly identifies the pressure that the force suffers under its call demand. We have a much higher level of demand in calls for service than most forces in the country. I think when we examine our 999s, there's only really ourselves and the Met have the same level of call demand. And it's just really, we will be looking this year to see what options we've got to supplement the resources in that area. There may be some opportunities to do that this year, but we'd always advise people to use our online services and only call 999 in emergency. We know emergency services response at this stage is very much under pressure as the pandemic continues. The inspection identifies some challenges we face around investigation. We've talked about that previously here, that there is a real capacity pressure. It's not unique to West Midlands Police. We've seen that through some of the other inspections we've seen on forces, and we'll continue to work through on that. And also, of course, we've seen the challenge that the inspection report put down around our support to vulnerable people. And I think this was an unusual statement that the inspector recognised the force did not have the resources to meet the needs of its very vulnerable population. And that will be an issue we will look to take forward as part of the work around the funding formula review that's taking place. But of course, the wise use of the extra resources we are of course getting as part of the uplift programme will be used to supplement that area. And there's quite a lot of work ongoing to see if there are ways we can deliver more efficiency and extract more time out, because whilst that is a fair and balanced comment from the inspectorate, our own ambition is always to improve and deliver more for the resources we get, and we'll carry on doing that. The final area, and I think we touched on it today, the force was graded good for its crime recording standards, and we would all want accurate and effective crime recording, and that's important. But I think it's fair to say the force will now absolutely engage in a campaign for reform internally in policing around how crime recording is carried out. I think there are some concerns the force has got around the level of bureaucracy that it generates, the level of time and resource committed to recording matters that the public might not themselves easily recognise as crime, the concerns we would have about the over-recording, where the standard required to remove a crime report when there is clear evidence that crime doesn't exist is far too onerous. Because actually recording accurately is just one part, I think, of an effective crime recording system. It has to still operate in the broader public interest. It can't be right that crimes are recorded against people where the police do not think there's evidence of crime exists, and yet that may still stay in the system for many years. And of course, we want our staff to devote their time to investigating and catching offenders instead of actually juggling a considerable amount of bureaucracy that gets in the way. So having moved to a position as result of good work by the force, we're recognised as good and actually extremely good in areas. I think we now have an ability to take forward an area where we will be pushing for reform, and we will of course share that with you as part of that work we do. The final point I wanted just to say was to wish everybody in the region a Merry Christmas who are celebrating it, but particularly I think to the officers and staff of West Midlands Police. This is a busy time of year for policing. While everybody is who's celebrating Christmas is enjoying themselves and no doubt very excited as they go into the new year, it is a time where policing doesn't stop. The demands can be very high, and certainly at a time where health is challenged again, we will be doing our best to ensure we deliver the resilient, reliable service that the force does. And just a big thanks to the officers and staff of the force who are working through this particular busy period. That's all I wanted to cover, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable, for that update, which then takes us to agenda item 10, which is the Strategic Policing and Crime Board Work Plan. And this consists of the work plan and actions and future lines of inquiry, which are both simply for noting today, which then brings us to agenda item 11, which is the date of the next meeting. And that will be Tuesday, 25th of January, 2022, which is a date for everyone's diary. So that completes the agenda for this meeting of the Strategic Policing and Crime Board. I want to thank everyone who's attended today, and in particular, members of the board, the Chief Constable, Deputy Chief Constable, police officers and staff, representatives from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, the Violence Reduction Unit, St Giles Trust, our youth commissioners, and members of the public. It's much appreciated. A very happy Christmas and holiday period, and a happy new year to one and all. I formally declare the meeting closed. Thanks very much.